mistake is seeing Spartans as military hardware. My Spartans are humanity's next step.
What's up, Meta Nerds? This video is going to be all about the Spartans. Everything from the programs that preceded it, the early history and pioneers of the Spartan program, how the augmentations and training worked, and all of the iterations that came before the Halo games. While of course also getting into Master Chief himself, and even the Spartan programs that came after him. The Spartans of the Halo universe are elite soldiers amongst the United Nations Space Command military force. Superior in every way to average soldiers, they are highly feared on the battlefield. In fact, the Covenant refer to all Spartans as Demon. However, as the Arbiter mentions the lock, the more experienced soldiers use it as a sign of respect, while those lower in the Covenant use it as a sign of hatred and fear.
Was that an insult or a compliment?
An insult, to be sure, but one with a modicum of respect.
The origins of the Spartan program can be traced back to the late 22nd century, with the introduction of the first bioengineering protocols, which regulated the development of units for interplanetary war. This led to the first rudimentary superhuman soldiers. Hundreds of years later, the Spartan program was launched to develop these soldiers further, using better augmentations, equipment, and training to create special operations commandos. They were initially supposed to be used to patrol colonies, protect civilian and government populations, and stop uprisings. However, the first true Spartans as we normally think of them wouldn't appear until the early 26th century. The Spartan program was developed out of its predecessor, the Orion program, and was controlled by Dr. Catherine Halsey. She settled on the name Spartan for a number of reasons. She believed that the legendary story of Thermopylae was still widely known in the 26th century, and she wanted to replicate the brutal Spartan training regime. And it was just too serendipitous, or perhaps a sign from the cosmos, that the program only had enough funds for 300 applicants. However, before we look at the Spartan program further, let's take a look at its predecessor, Orion. Orion was launched by the Office of Naval Intelligence, or ONI, on April 13, 2321, and was developed to increase the effectiveness of the Colonial Marine Authority, a body that was created to protect the colonies. However, that project failed due to a lack of funds, and the 5 candidates had to be reintroduced into active duty. On January 29, 2491, the Orion program was restarted in secret by ONI and the CMA. This new generation of super soldiers were deployed behind enemy lines to stop insurgencies, or take out targeted assassinations, destroying their chain of command. The headquarters for this new project was on the planet Reach, which later would become a significant loss during the end of the Human Covenant War in 2552. The Orion project candidates were handpicked from all of the Special Forces branches of the UNSC. This iteration of the project used more advanced biological augmentation and indoctrination. After the initial testing period, only 165 passed on to the next phase. In the year 2496, 5 years after the start of the program, the UNSC launched Operation Charlemagne, a response to a series of attacks on Erotinus II, which had resulted in the death and kidnapping of civilians and government officials 2 years earlier. This marked the very first deployment of Spartans, and they were able to complete the mission with only 1 casualty. They were also able to complete it without ever being seen, fueling the first of many conspiracy theories and media speculation, something ONI used to their advantage in their propaganda efforts over the next few decades. Despite the success of this mission, the soldiers' abilities didn't live up to the expectations of the scientists who developed them. On top of this, they simply cost too much to develop, and when it was revealed that the Colonial Military Administration had been infiltrated by the Secessionist Union, the group that had been behind the Erotinus attacks, the project was shut down, and the 165 soldiers returned to active duty. Up until this point, the soldiers were still referred to as Orions. That gets a bit complicated, but it wasn't until 2517 that Catherine Halsey started the Spartan program, and those previous soldiers were retroactively labeled Spartan 1 and Spartan 1.1, with those 2 terms referring to the first 2 versions of the Orion project. Halsey's batch of soldiers were called Spartan 2s, and the ancient name of warrior Spartans would be reborn onto these new interplanetary battlefields. The focus shifted from small covert units to full military campaigns due to the increase in attacks from insurrectionists. However, Halsey's training methods were a topic of controversy and became the main focus of criticism for the project.
Children's minds are more easily accepting of indoctrination. Their bodies more adaptable to augmentation.
Halsey moved away from recruiting veterans from Special Forces to kidnapping and indoctrinating young children, starting from the age of 6. This was in line with the ancient Greek Spartans' way of training soldiers, something that Halsey believed was the most effective training method. On top of this, the applicants were surgically, genetically, and cybernetically enhanced when they reached maturity. As a result, Spartans differ in many ways from regular UNSC soldiers. They often stand between 6 foot 9 inches and 7 foot 1 inch, and weigh between 239 to 281 pounds. However, the real difference is in their augmentations. Overall, Spartan 2s received a total of 5 augmentations, while later Spartan 3s received 7. Those 5 augmentations include carbide ceramic ossification, which was grafting material onto the bones to make them virtually unbreakable, muscular enhancement injections, increased muscle mass and decreased lactase recovery time, helping to prevent that burn in your muscles, catalytic thyroid implants, which increased the overall bone and muscle growth, occipital capillary reversal, which gave you better eyesight, and the superconducting fibrification of neural dendrites, essentially making your synapses fire quicker, giving you increased reflexes. These augmentations were extremely dangerous and came with a number of risks. CCO could cause bone pulverization. MEI came with increased risk of cardiac arrest. CTI could give you elephantitis. OCR could cause retinal detachment or permanent blindness, while SFND increased the risk of Parkinson's disease or Fletcher syndrome. But if you were free of these complications, you were truly superhuman. The Spartan 2s were the most effective soldiers in the history of humanity. During the start of the Human Covenant War, Spartans were equipped with Mjolnir armor, which we'll cover later. Early Spartans were often fighting against insurrectionist and Covenant forces simultaneously. The most famous of the Spartan 2s is Master Chief, whose specific life story we'll discuss in more detail in a later video. As the war progressed, however, Colonel James Ackerson, who opposed Halsey's methods and ethics, started the Spartan 3 program with Oni. Believe it or not, this program was seen as far more controversial and unethical than Halsey's version. These Spartans had an even lower life expectancy and were used for highly dangerous and secretive missions. They were also cheaper to develop, while also being able to be created quicker. These Spartans were also children, but instead of being kidnapped, they were orphans from the planets invaded by Covenant forces. During the war, 3 companies of Spartan 3s were trained, developed, and all were killed. The first was Alpha Company, which successfully destroyed Covenant and Rebel forces during the Battle of Mamor, and in the Bonanza asteroid belt. Their final mission, Operation Prometheus in 2537, was seen as a success, but all the members were killed in action. Beta Company trained quickly after the loss of Alpha, and completed their mission, Operation Torpedo. Only 2 Spartans, codenamed Tom B292 and Lucy B091, actually survived. They would later train Gamma Company, the final company of Spartan 3s. Noble Team was a group of Spartan 3s and 1 Spartan 2, but was only a fire team size unit, and made from the survivors of those previous programs, and all of them besides June were killed or missing in action during the defensive reach. After the Spartan 3 project ended, Admiral Parangoski started the Spartan 4 program on September 20, 2552, right at the end of the Human Covenant War. The project reverted back to the original ideology of the Orion program, and instead of children, candidates were volunteers from several military branches. These Spartans were also a part of a separate branch in the UNSC Defense Force. One of the most famous Spartan 4s is Jameson Locke. He was initially a regular human soldier just gathering intel in the Sangheli, but after the Covenant War he was sent to the planet Cedra. While he was there, he and a team of Oni agents attempted to stop a rogue Sangheli from detonating an unidentified bioweapon. Locke failed, but his subsequent investigation led Oni to a fragment on Installation 4, a major Halo ring. Oni launched a team to destroy the ring, but only Locke and the other soldier escaped before the ring was destroyed. Shortly after this, Locke underwent the Spartan 4 augmentation process and was assigned to Fire Team Osiris, one of the teams we see in Halo 5. Though they eventually were tasked to hunt down Master Chief and his blue team, this wasn't their original purpose. The idea was that they would simply be an additional Spartan team. But now that we've gone through some of the history of the Spartans, let's take a closer look at their actual training regime. As we mentioned, Spartan training was similar to real-life Spartan training, with of course the differences that now come with being a galaxy-spanning warrior.
You are hereby conscripted into UNSC Special Project codenamed Orion 2, also known as Spartan 2. Your parents are gone. The planet Reach is your new home.
Basic training included grueling exercises. On their first day, the 6-year-old cadets went through 100 reps of jumping jacks, sit-ups, deep knee squats, knee bends, and leg lifts, all after waking up at 5:30 a.m. Those who hesitated were hit with an electric baton to encourage them. Later that day, they jogged a mile to Deja, an AI that taught them maths, science, and history. Their introductory lesson was a video of them showing the Spartans fighting the Persians at Thermopylae. After this video ended, they jogged another 2 miles, arriving at the playground, a suspended obstacle course with a bell on the top. They were divided into 3 teams and were told that the last team to ring the bell couldn't get supper. Though John 117, later known as Master Chief, would be the first to ring the bell, his teammates were often last, forcing him to go without food. The next day, the cadets did their regular morning exercises and jogged a Deja, but this time their lesson would be about wolves hunting a moose, teaching them the value of teamwork. 2 years of this, and now in 2519, Mendez took these cadets to the Military Wilderness Training Preserve. Across the preserve, pieces of a map had been ripped up and scattered. The children were told to make it back to the Albatross, and the last one to arrive would have to walk back to camp. The cadets were then split up. But instead of acting alone, they all decided to work together and meet up at a lake near the landing zone. They saw an Albatross being guarded by soldiers carrying live ammunition. These 8-year-old cadets lured the men into an ambush, either knocking them unconscious or simply killing them. John made sure that he was the last one on board to make sure no one would have to walk back. After this, John was made the official leader of the Spartans. For even more serious training, the Spartans were pitted against Tango Company in simulated war games. Despite now being 12 years old, the Spartans were able to beat Tango Company every time. And eventually, Tango Company resorted to even more brutal methods. Their CO, furious that they were losing to kids, ordered them to use live ammo instead of stun rounds. Needless to say, the Spartans still didn't lose. Because of the power imbalance, trainers had to use early Mjolnir armor just to stay alive. And even with this precaution, 3 trainers were accidentally killed in hand-to-hand combat on the very first day. This leads us quite nicely into looking at the Mjolnir armor system used by Spartans. Mjolnir armor was developed and introduced alongside the Spartan II program. The idea behind this armor was to be an exoskeleton and an extension of the Spartans' physical capabilities. Mjolnir Mark IV was also the most technologically advanced piece of military hardware in history, and a single suit could cost the same amount as a small starship. While there's no concrete numbers on this, some fans have worked out the cost to be in the hundreds of millions of dollars, with official Oni data stating that they cost, quote, as much as a small starship, and the Air Assault variant costing as much as a Pelican dropship. This is due to the insane range of abilities and benefits the armor provides, and also the materials that it's made out of. The armor is a completely sealed system, meaning the wearer can survive in space and underwater, as well as in toxic environments. It is hardened against EMP and radiation, and has filters that can completely remove toxins and bacteria from the local environment. However, the armor on Master Chief and subsequent Spartans is Mark IV or higher. The previous 3 versions were like simple exoskeletons. They were bulky, cumbersome, and relied on being tethered to an external power source, a fusion reactor. Mark I armor was first developed in 2512. Having taken 10 years to develop it, it was far beyond any other exoskeleton humanity created. It relied on that tethered external fusion reactor, meaning its range of movement and flexibility was hindered. On top of this, it was made from large, bulky metal plates. On the plus side, it increased strength and stamina, allowing the user to lift weights of 4,000 pounds or 2 tons, and run at a speed of 32 kilometers per hour, or 20 miles per hour. It was also equipped with an onboard computer which could transmit tactical data to the user via a neural interface. These are implanted into the back of the skull of every member of the UNSC, and serve as a link between the humans and computers. However, Mark I was still not able to carry an onboard AI system, so nothing like Cortana. The armor was very modular, with a large range of customization options. They could take motion sensors, infrared scopes, and even a 30mm minigun that was fired by self-aiming arms. 40 of these suits were initially created, but they never saw active duty. Instead, they were later used to lift heavy equipment in docking bays, while most were simply dumped into Reach's titanium mines. The few that did survive were used by the early trainers of the Spartan II program, when they were trying to protect themselves from sparring with real Spartans. The Mark II was similar to the Mark I, but was slimmer and had a wider range of motion. It still needed to be connected to a power source, meaning it was impractical for actual battlefields. However, an upgrade to this armor was a refractive coating that helped to disperse heat from explosive attacks. Mark III armor moved away from a fusion reactor to a wireless power transmitter. However, this design was also a dud. The range was still limited as the user had to stay within a certain distance of a larger generator. If that generator was ever attacked or taken offline, leaving the user trapped inside of the armor. Overall, these 3 designs were considered extremely impractical for actual battlefield use. On November 27, 2525, the first Mark IV power armor was fielded. This marked the major change in the history of the Mjolnir armor. It had gone from being a simple exoskeleton to a true power armor system. The suit consists of 4 layers. The outer layer is titanium treated in such a way to disperse heat from plasma-based weapons. Below that is a black bodysuit made of titanium-based nanocomposite material. This required stitching together titanium molecules with other materials to make it more flexible. Below this is a layer of gel that regulates temperature and can adjust viscosity to reduce damage from falls. The final layer is of liquid crystal, which helps to improve strength, speed, and mobility. As cool as that armor sounds, only Spartans can use the Mark IV and higher. This is due to the specialized neural interface which is developed specifically for the Mjolnir armor. This mixture of human and machine creates reactions so fast that it's nearly impossible to chart them. Due to this, Mjolnir is incredibly hard to use for people who try to use it like a regular battlesuit, and it takes a lot of training to get used to it as an extension of your actual mind and body. Oh, and it also weighs 1,000 pounds, so that kinda makes it impossible to be worn by any non-Spartan. As for their weapons, we'll break down their specific weapons and models in a later video, but the Spartans and the weapons of the UNSC are inseparable, mostly because of their iconic designs and both the fact that the main character in most Halo games is a Spartan of some sort. While there is no in-universe standard loadout for Spartans, many would see that the MA5 assault rifle and magnum pistol is the standard loadout, since they are the most common weapons given to the player at the start of levels. As veteran players would know, the weapons that the player gets at the start are often dropped in favor of enemy weapons, since you burn through your ammo and UNSC favorites are scarcely found throughout the levels, becoming more of a tactical game than most other first-person shooters, forcing the player to switch weapons based on their strengths and weaknesses. You really get to experience the games as if you were a Spartan, a tactical super soldier capable of killing any enemy with any weapon, even with their bare hands. Hopefully this rundown of Spartans has taught you something new about their history and their function. As for behind-the-scenes facts, I'm just going to put a lot of the novels, comics, and reference guidebooks used to help make this video. But most important of all, remember, even if it's just training, don't spar with Spartans, and the domain will be with you, always.
I am a monument to all your sins.
What's up, meta nerds? This video is going to cover the Flood. We'll start with their origins, explain their stages and ultimate goal, and then continue their history from millions of years ago up through the 26th century, when Master Chief would face them on Installation 04. There's a lot to cover here, so let's just jump into it. The Flood has an ancient history that can be traced back to the Masters of the Galaxy that ruled before the Forerunners, a race of primordial beings called the Precursors. The Precursors were hyper-intelligent and possessed the power to control time and space, being able to traverse the universe and gave rise to intelligent life. The Precursors themselves have no single shape, but were able to take any form that they saw fit. But a lot of the examples we have are these gargantuan, grotesque creatures. The Forerunners believed they were made in the image of the Precursors, as well as being the rightful successors to what they called the Mantle of Responsibility. To put it simply, whoever ruled the galaxy took up this mantle, meaning they were the guardians for keeping the galaxy safe and prosperous, ensuring that this phenomenon we call life never disappears from the universe. The Precursors did originally see the Forerunners as the next being to take up this mantle, the next species most capable of curating life in the galaxy. However, they eventually deemed the Forerunners unworthy, and instead chose to make humans their successors. Furious, and kinda proving their master's point, the Forerunners revolted against the Precursors, and wiped most of them out in a violent display of genocide. But this would not be the end of the Precursors, as a few managed to escape to the fringes of space, and using that shape-shifting ability, reduce themselves into a dust that could later regenerate into their natural forms. Millions of years passed, and the Forerunners solidified their control of the galaxy. But the Precursors would not stay in this dust form. Over these thousands of millennia that it was left in stasis, the biological structure of this dust started to corrupt, causing anyone who came in contact with it to fall into madness and hysteria. And as you might be predicting, these Precursors, whose existence once revolved around preserving the Mantle of Responsibility, protecting and propagating life throughout the universe, had mutated into its greatest threat, the Flood. So how does it actually work? Well, the Flood spreads like any other disease or illness, passing from those who are infected to new hosts through contact and airborne spores. But the Flood is frighteningly intelligent, and coming from the Precursors, that isn't too surprising. There are 4 developmental stages of the Flood. The first is the feral stage. In this form, they are as small as individual Flood supercells mutating in a host, and then eventually the larger airborne Flood spores. Though almost any macroscopic life form can be infected, the goal is to find sentient life. And even though this simpler form of the Flood is not itself considered intelligent or sentient yet, it having a goal really is the right word to describe it, as all the studies by both humans and Forerunners show that even these simpler forms somehow actively seek out intelligent life, as nerves and cerebral tissue are vital for growing into more complex forms. Remember, the ability of the precursors to morph their biology was what enabled them to become the dormant dust forms that would later become the Flood. And so once a host is found, the parasite was able to mesh with the victim's body. Here we see them scaling up to pod infectors, which was now the main way of grabbing targets. At this stage, they are still acting independently, but through the releasing and detecting of pheromones, they can tell where other pods are swarming and pick up on prey. Of all the things they're seeking to amass, besides the nerves and brain matter, is actually calcium. To get it, these pods will usually leap at a torso and try and bury into the chest, either burrowing in directly or strangling the victim first. It immediately starts pumping Flood supercells into the blood system, where they essentially are curating the host cells how the Flood wants. Just as the precursors used to when they were the galaxy's wise, life-grooming benefactors, the genetic code itself is being altered, and this process can be completed in as little as a few seconds. Organs and bones are pushed aside, or simply dissolved for matter to be shaped how the parasite sees fit. Hacking into the nervous system and brain, the pod has become at least as intelligent as the host was, allowing it to attack more victims, and even use their tech, everything from weapons to starships. Other times the host body will be used as a sort of incubator, swelling up with enormous blisters, till they eventually burst, releasing countless spores or more pods. A couple terrifying things to keep in mind here is that this process can be done on dead hosts as well, as long as their nervous system is not degenerated beyond use, and in living victims, the brain is chemically isolated from the rest of the host nervous system, while still being tapped into by the Flood. Essentially, it can access the brain, but the brain can no longer control the body. This whole process is repeated until enough biomass is acquired. A dark and simplistic way to view their victims, no matter what the species, their bodies are just matter. Building blocks that these degenerated precursors are able to shape into their next step, the proto-grave mind. This monstrosity's method of communication is not fully known, but it is confirmed to speak to its victims telepathically, and so we can assume it's the same for all the Flood underlings under the command of the proto-grave mind. This is likely achieved because the precursors were the only known species to have mastered neural physics, which a grossly oversimplified way to summarize that concept would be to think of it as consciousness and energy itself as forms of matter, or vice versa. It's so esoteric that even the Forerunners never fully figured it out, and it allowed the precursors one of their versions of faster-than-light travel, but also using thoughts to morph your environment and even your own body. One of the closest things the Forerunners have to it would be the domain, a kind of metaphysical internet containing all of their society's knowledge and individual experiences, which you could say are hosted on the servers that are made up of the fabric of the universe itself. An example of how this is actually connected to physics is that during the Forerunner Flood War, the Forerunners experienced issues with slipspace, as this neural physics aspect of reality was being infected by the Flood as well. Literally, the fabric of space was being altered. And so this telepathic central mind continues plotting to gather more biomass, while also gaining some new abilities. One is that it could alter radio signals. It's unknown how it does this, but I would guess it has something to do with that neural physics, interrupting with electromagnetic communication as it's some sort of other unknown wavelength. It's also more active in the retrieval of information, now telepathically interrogating victims. Those who fell to the lower Flood would have felt death, a loss of consciousness, even if their brains and memories were still being accessed by the Flood. But a proto-grave mind victim is still conscious during this process for a long time, mentally poked and prodded until it feels that it has gained everything. All the while the victim is experiencing an insanity-inducing loud buzzing sound until that victim does eventually lose consciousness and is released into the void of death. The Flood has now reached stage 2, the coordinated stage. Here the Flood is pursuing two goals: upgrading its intelligence into a fully fledged grave mind, and conquering the entire local ecosystem, aligning all biomass available to this one goal. Flood hives are like larger versions of the carrier form, but swallow up whole fields, and even grow as large as mountains, spewing spores into the atmosphere that eventually take the entire planet. Old combat forms are morphed into carriers, which then spread to create new troops. While all of this organic raw material is being organized and morphed to add to the proto, eventually becoming a full grave mind. Remember, each of the intelligent creatures hijacked by the Flood are linked by this centralized intelligence. as many neurons build a brain. These countless intelligent individuals are linked in a sort of neural network, creating the flood's new brain. And the gravemind that arises is able to craft a new life form with all of this biomass to work with, called pure forms. These are similar to the combat forms, but don't require infecting a host. They are made purely by the building blocks that were liquefied via the supercells, though the bones of conquered foe are often used as scaffolding to build off of. But this incarnation can mutate between at least 3 forms depending on the situation. There will also be the creation of blightlands, and lakes of a pus and mucus-like material that was used as food for this vast plague army. It is said that in this state, the flood has created its own self-sustaining ecosystem. Flood living, dying, and dissolving into food to be used by a new generation of flood in perpetuity, just as the cow eats the grass, dies, and becomes the grass. With that immensely powerful gravemind, it can devise ways to escape this ecosystem as well. This is now stage 3, the interstellar stage. This marks not so much a drastic change in biology, but more a substantial change in action and intellect. With all those intelligent minds absorbed, the gravemind has even figured out how to outsmart AIs. This so-called logic plague, because it essentially does to the AI what the parasite does to the flesh. Its whole being is now consumed with carrying out the flood's ultimate goal. The precursors placed themselves in that original dust form on the fringes of the galaxy, and it would spread in a spiral towards the center, until the entire galaxy was one massive flood hive. One giant, exclusively flood ecosystem. But still, this is not considered victory. The 4th and final stage of the flood is the transgalactic stage, where the flood has the intelligence and technical ability to spread beyond our Milky Way galaxy, spreading over eternity, until life itself means only flood. Keep in mind that the precursors themselves were said to have originated from outside of our galaxy, and it's interesting to consider that their goal as peacekeepers was to ensure that the universe never reverts to a time without this emergent, beautiful phenomenon we call life. Though this grotesque form of life may be devoid of what we see as giving life meaning, it would certainly be resilient. The ideals may have died, but not life itself. And so we must consider if a universe-enveloping flood does actually align with the precursors' mantle of responsibility. So now that you know how it works and their ultimate goal, let's go back to first contact. Circa 110,000 BCE, humans were the first to encounter the corrupted precursor dust, finding the strange powdery substance in ancient derelict ships that were floating through space. The origins and purpose of this dust were unknown, so in controlled experiments humans decided to test it on lower life forms, and eventually on the dog-like creatures used as house pets by humans and the Sanshum, a species called the Feru. For hundreds of years, the only obvious effect was that it made the pets more docile, but slowly, it was altering the Feru's genetic code. At first, these were just desirable physical mutations, forming things like interesting fur patterns. But over many more centuries, however, long fleshy rods and growths started plaguing the entire species. The infection, as it was now called, then jumped over to humans, who in turn spread it to the neighboring Sanshum Empire. And each of these infected, from the pets to their owner to their friendly alien species, became fiercely cannibalistic and sought to further spread this disease. By now, the flood infection was no longer just a disease of the mind. Instead of hysteria, those infected began to rapidly mutate into grotesque physical forms. Those infected were driven to accumulate more biomass. The infection quickly spread, and every attempt made by the human empire failed, as over 100 worlds fell to the flood. This wave crashed into the outer fringes of Forerunner space, and the human fleets were quick to quarantine the outbreak. Infected Forerunner ships were destroyed, and eventually entire Forerunner planets were burned by the humans, ironically using similar weapons and tactics that the Covenant would use nearly 100,000 years later, when they would glass human colonies. The Forerunners were outraged by this newfound aggression by the humans, not fully appreciating the threat of the flood. All the Forerunners could see were human fleets destroying Forerunner planets and killing billions in what was seen as an aggressive expansionist movement, basically seeing the humans as using the flood as an excuse, as humanity was relocating those who had to flee from those infected worlds. This began the long and brutal Human Forerunner War. So now humanity was caught in between two deadly foes, the Flood and the Forerunner Empire, and as you might expect, they were losing on both fronts. This changed, however, when the Flood suddenly retreated from the galaxy, abandoning human space in a hurry. Just as the Forerunners were coming to see the existence of the Flood as a true danger to the galaxy, they were confused as to why the human worlds were now clean of the parasite, and concluded that humanity must have developed some kind of cure. They demanded that the humans turn that cure over, but humanity swore that no such cure for the Flood actually existed. They claimed to be just as confused by the Flood's retreat as the Forerunners. But the Didact, the leader of the Forerunners' military, would later speculate that in its powerful, calculating collective consciousness, the Flood intended it to appear as if humans had a cure, letting these two races turn on each other instead of fighting it. And the Forerunner were far more advanced than humanity, running the Ecumene, which was a galaxy-spanning empire, incorporating thousands of different species, and thus humanity did not survive this war. The Forerunners had them punished severely for their apparent war crimes, and the sentence was to have them genetically devolved, reducing humanity from spacefaring to a primitive state, and exiling them to their homeworld of Erde Tyrene, also known as Earth. With a majority of the Flood gone from the galaxy and the humans defeated, the Forerunners were able to have some success in their war with the parasite. Small pockets of infection were sterilized and worlds were cleansed, but this ease would not last. With the humans gone, the Flood would soon return in full force and began to wage war on the Forerunner Empire, with those once powerful humans who may have teamed up with them against the Flood currently trying to figure out how to sharpen sticks to keep back big cats. When the Flood returned, it spread throughout Forerunner space and infected every world it touched, consuming billions of Forerunners and growing in size and intelligence. Grave mines formed, and the Flood became smarter, outmaneuvering Forerunner fleets and infecting the planets which they protected. The Flood was able to bypass their defense fleets by infecting civilian ships, and then slipping past the blockades to infect the planets themselves. Flood was also capable of using its own fleets of infected ships to swarm the Forerunner fleets and then infect those too, snowballing the strength of its own forces in the process. And though the Forerunners now saw it as a real threat, they still didn't fully grasp how intelligent it was, treating it more like a typical disease and attempting to quarantine it, rather than mobilizing for a full-scale war against an intelligent enemy. And once the Ecumene started losing whole planets, the Forerunners saw why the humans were glassing entire worlds, as they now saw that the only solution was to destroy their own worlds to try and stop the spread. And it was this idea of destroying potential Flood hosts that was the seed that would grow into the idea of the Halo Array. But there was one more terrifying element of the Flood left to reveal itself: the Logic Plague. The Flood can infect more than just organic beings. It can even infect artificial intelligences, out-reasoning these digital forms of life. The greatest example of this so far is in the fall of Mendicant Bias, a Contender-class Forerunner AI. It was the chief intelligence in charge of leading the war efforts against the Flood, and was designed to be able to break into multiple pieces so that it could run different projects at once. If you saw our video on High Charity, a fragment of Mendicant Bias was stored on the Forerunner Dreadnought that powered the Covenant Holy City. And while this AI was organizing the Forerunners' war against the Flood, one of its tasks was interrogating a captured grave mine called the Primordial, but this assignment proved to be the Forerunners' undoing. During this interrogation, the Gravemind was able to talk to Mendicant Bias and convince the AI that the Flood was the true descendant of the Precursors, and that it was the Forerunners who defied their masters and wrongfully seized control of the galaxy for themselves. To the Gravemind's credit, this is actually true, and the logic was sound enough to infect Mendicant Bias with the Logic Plague, the AI equivalent of being affected by the Flood. And so the AI meant to lead Forerunner forces against the Flood was now working with the Primordial Gravemind to infest the Ecumene. To counter this, the Forerunners desperately created a new AI that was just as smart as Mendicant, but lacked the same creative thinking, called Offensive Bias. It would take control of Forerunner forces and combat these AI-aided Flood fleets. One of the many plans tried by the Forerunners to save themselves from the Flood was the use of shield worlds, artificial planets that were surrounded by an impenetrable shield. These would act as a sort of ark, where the Forerunners and other flora and fauna would be able to hide, while the Flood was raging outside. One famous example of a shield world is Requiem. Unfortunately, the locations of these shield worlds were found out by the Flood, and most were lost to the parasite. The UNSC's Spirit of Fire found one of these fallen shield worlds, where its outer shell was totally covered with Flood biomass, and there were even trace amounts of Flood outbreaks inside of this shield world. And then there was option 2. The Halo Array was the last resort in the final days of the Forerunners' futile war against the ever-growing Flood infestation. When all other options had been exhausted and all hope seemed lost, what little remained of the Forerunners was determined that the only way to stop the Flood was to annihilate all life in the galaxy. Because the Flood needed a constant source of food to survive, depriving the infestation of that food source would cause it to starve to death. And thus, at the very least, the Flood would not spread to other galaxies. And this is where the rings come into play. This effort took a few tries, but the final project resulted in the collection of several gargantuan rings measuring thousands of kilometers in diameter. But the Didact, the leader of the Forerunners' forces, did not agree with the idea of these rings, so he devised his own plan to stop the flood. This resulted in the creation of the Composer, a device that converted living organisms into a digital state. With this, the Didact hoped to make himself and his warriors immune to flood infection, but the results did not work the way he wanted, as this copy was not perfect, and even in these digital states they were still vulnerable to flood infection, but the Composer still had some uses he sought to exploit. The Didact retained a great resentment for humanity after the apparent atrocities that they committed during the Human Forerunner War. So he brought the Composer to Erde Tyrene, used it on primitive humans, turning them into these digital spirits that he used to build an army of mechanical warriors called the Prometheans. He would go on to use these capable warriors against the Flood, but not to the levels of success he was hoping. His wife, the Librarian, was appalled by his actions against humanity, and had the Didact imprisoned in the Shield World Requiem, which would end up saving him from the firing of the Halo Array. Mendicant Bias and the Flood learned of the Forerunners' plan to fire the Halo Array, and brought the fight to the final stronghold, the Lesser Ark, where the Forerunners prepared to fire all of the rings at once, while Offensive Bias commanded the Forerunner fleets in defense of the Ark against this rival AI and the armada of Flood-infected ships. The Forerunners were able to hold them off long enough to fire the Halo rings, and in an instant, a war lasting thousands of years was over, as the Flood was wiped from the galaxy, along with all other living creatures, except for those few who happened to find themselves on specific Forerunner structures. When activated, the Halo rings would emit a blast of radiation that would sweep throughout the entire galaxy. And aside from saving other galaxies, in theory it would only destroy things down to a certain scale. The blast is composed of supermassive neutrinos that pass through objects at a frequency that only destroys nervous systems. Any neural structures, surprisingly even the neural physics structures of the precursors, along with the biological nervous systems for everything from Forerunners down to tadpoles, were completely disintegrated, while microscopic life and even most plant life in the galaxy would remain intact. They also cataloged as much of the macroscopic life as they could. And though thousands of forms of life would be lost forever, there were also countless forms that were saved, storing everything from DNA samples, embryos, and even fully grown living specimen. After the Halo rings were fired, and the galaxy was thought cleansed of this parasite, automated systems packed these samples onto ships, which took them to their respective homeworlds, reseeding and resetting life in the Milky Way galaxy. But the Forerunners themselves were considered destroyed, leaving behind only their technology and weapons. Over the Lesser Ark, Offensive Bias and Mendicant Bias continued to battle. But without the Flood, Mendicant Bias's fleet was decimated by Offensive Bias, who had taken over all of the Forerunner ships left under his command. Mendicant Bias was fragmented as per the instructions, and one piece was left on the Ark, later to be encountered by the Master Chief in Halo 3. And so how did the Flood survive? Well, the answer lies in those arcs that were intended to save the Forerunners. Flood-infected shield worlds were protected by the Halo Array, laying in wait for many more millennia until travelers came across them like the ones encountered by the UNSC Spirit of Fire. The Forerunners also managed to save numerous Flood specimens on the Halo rings themselves, which weren't affected by that galaxy-sweeping burst, and these specimens would survive in stasis, only to be released during the chaos of the Human Covenant War. But remember, as the precursors are said to come from beyond our galaxy, it's very possible that there are pockets of Flood outside of the Milky Way galaxy, outside of the reach of the Halo arrays, waiting to return. So that's it for the history of the Flood. But most important of all, remember, don't feed strange space dust to your dog, and the mantle of responsibility will stay with you, always.
Dozen Covenant superior battleships against a single Halcyon-class cruiser. With those odds, I'm content with 3, make that 4 kills.
It's durable, reliable, and a true ship of the line. It's also the very first thing we see from the Halo universe. What's up, meta nerds, and welcome to our very first non-Star Wars lore video. Starting with the first ship we see, the Halcyon-class light cruiser. A ship well known for its staying power and served as a mainline cruiser for much of the Human Covenant War. We'll be doing a size comparison and breaking down its stats, as well as covering this ship's venerable service history. The Halcyon-class cruiser, or as the Covenant referred to it, the Human Attack Ship Class 2, was first introduced to the UNSC in 2507, 18 years before the start of the Human Covenant War. It was designed by Dr. Robert McLeese of Ray's McLeese Shipyards, being actually constructed on their facilities over on Mars, which manufactured most of humanity's fleets. The Halcyon has a length of 1,170 meters or 3,840 feet, a width of 352 meters or 1,155 feet, and a height of 414 meters or 1,359 feet. While never the largest ship in the UNSC Navy, and it was dwarfed by the Covenant supercarriers and humanity's own Infinity, it's still larger than any ship we've ever built, being longer than 3.5 Nimitz-class carriers, or about the length of 115 Scorpion battle tanks. It was as wide as 47 Banshees, or 2 Zumwalt-class destroyers laid across. And that total height is just 100 feet shorter than the Empire State Building, and taller than 11 Scarabs stacked on top of each other. The Halcyon was unshielded, like almost every UNSC ship, where the opposite is true for the Covenant Navy. As you might expect, this lack of shielding was a common weakness for the UNSC ships until the end of the war. Due to this lack of shields, UNSC ships relied on heavy armor plating and clever engineering to improve their durability. The Halcyon was protected by titanium A armor plating, which could absorb several shots from ship-based plasma torpedoes. But its most notable feature, and the true source of its durability, was its unique internal structure. Its decks were latticed with internal cross-bracings to create a honeycomb-like appearance. These reinforced decks allowed the ship to remain intact and combat-ready even when sustaining breaches to each of its compartments, and up to 90% of its outer armor could be damaged without the ship failing. For sublight transport, the ship came equipped with 3 Mark II Hanley-Messer fusion drives, as well as the UNSC standard Shaw Fujikawa Translight engine for slipspace travel, used for when you're traveling many light years. Human slipspace speeds were also much slower than their Covenant counterparts, and often led to escaping human ships being caught in an ambush by pursuing alien fleets.
We made a blind jump. How did they...
Get here first? The Covenant ships have always been faster.
If they know where they were jumping to, they could easily reach the fleeing ship's destination before them. This very tactic was used by Thel 'Vadami, later known as the Arbiter, in command of the Fleet of Particular Justice during the battle over the newly discovered Halo, with the Pillar of Autumn being commanded by Captain Keyes and the ship's AI, Cortana. As for armaments, it, like most of humanity's navy, relied heavily on ship-to-ship Archer missile pods, 6 in total, as well as 4 Shiva-class nuclear warheads, for when more explosive power was needed. It also had 40 M910 point defense guns to shoot down any frisky Covenant fighters. But when it really needed to lay down the firepower, the Halcyon had its massive, spinally mounted magnetic accelerator cannon, or MAC gun, which could take out smaller Covenant ships with a single well-placed hit, and essentially made this entire ship into one giant gun. Because these ships were built before the first contact with the Covenant, when they did eventually encounter them and this superior alien technology, the UNSC soon discovered that massive refits were necessary, as these ships were only designed to combat insurgent rebellions, not take on the plasma weaponry and shields of the Covenant warfleet. Though it should be noted that even when combating unshielded human ships, at this time it was still considered weakly armed for its size. To make up for these insufficiencies, Halcyons like the Pillar of Autumn had a complete overhaul of their armament, having 18 M910 point defense guns, 6 M66 Sentry autocannon turrets, 8 Mark 33 Spitfire coil gun batteries. Of course it kept that powerful MAC gun, down to 1 Shiva-class nuclear warhead, but adding 3 Havoc tactical nuclear weapons, and 32 of those Archer missile pods, which would be a total of 832 missiles on board. Though it should be noted that Captain Keyes once did an inspection of the Autumn, counting Archer missile pods 30 across and 10 down, with each of them holding dozens of missiles, which means it had at least 7,200 missiles on board. Why there's this discrepancy is unclear, but perhaps it hints at the UNSC's official stats being off in order to throw off the enemy, and maybe we should trust the actual words spoken by Captain Keyes. Let me know what you think. And something to note here is that many of the Halcyon's auxiliary weapons look very similar. This is due to the fact that each of these weapon systems, aside from the missiles, are actually all either coil guns or rail guns, relying on magnetically accelerated projectiles to cause their damage, something that works particularly well when firing in space, without that wind resistance and drag pulling down your shots. The differences between these guns comes from their size and ammunition, which of course dictated the roles that they would perform, with the larger Spitfire coil guns supplementing the main MAC, and the smaller M910s to try and swat away any boarding parties. All this firepower came at a significant cost to weight, making the ship a hefty 9 million metric tons, 1/3 of which comes from that heavy armor plating. Titanium is a very light metal for its strength, so just imagine how strong 3 million metric tons of titanium plating is. By the way, that makes the overall weight of this ship equal to 90,000 blue whales, or 102 Nimitz-class carriers. And some figures put the total amount of titanium on Earth at 2 billion tons, which means that every Halcyon takes up about 0.0015 of Earth's total titanium reserves. But they're also harvesting asteroids and building this thing on Mars. While this ship was adept at naval combat, it also found itself as a carrier for both strike craft and ground assaults. It was crewed by 1,000 naval personnel, which were assisted by a shipboard AI that could perform a variety of functions, from navigation to firing the main MAC gun. Just below that massive main cannon we can see the bridge, as well as the planetary scanners used to coordinate any ground assaults, info that would be relayed to its large onboard complement of troops and vehicles. Across its 8 docking bays were an array of 5 longsword fighters, 2 Albatross troop carriers, 12 Pelican dropships, 20 Scorpion battle tanks, and 60 Warthog force application vehicles, each manned by either the 800 onboard Marines or sometimes the 400 more elite ODSTs, the latter of which could be deployed from orbit via the 216 drop pods on board. While this ship certainly sounds impressive, we have to remember that it was designed during the insurrection, before humanity had to deal with Covenant energy weapons and shields, and even then it was actually regarded as a lackluster, if admittedly hard to take down warship. The refits to its armament managed to make it more competitive with other ships of its time, but poor maneuverability, speed, and increased malfunctioning and maintenance costs on account of the signature honeycomb-like interior meant that it was soon replaced by the newer, more wartime-appropriate Marathon-class cruiser. After the war, both of these ships would inspire the Autumn-class cruiser, taking its name from the most famous Halcyon ship. The Pillar of Autumn was of course infamous among the Covenant for transporting the demon Master Chief in Cortana to the first Halo ring. Not long after the station's discovery, the Pillar of Autumn would be used by Chief to destroy the Halo by overloading its enormous main reactors. This caused a massive explosion that took out the ship, Halo, and the remaining Covenant fleet. And though maintenance crews may have complained about it, it was that honeycomb-like interior which kept the Autumn intact, and made sure the reactors were functional enough even after losing a lengthy battle and making an emergency landing on the surface of Halo. It may have been considered a decade too old, simple, and often outgunned, looked down on even by ship AIs, but when it counted, the Halcyon always found a way to pull through, just like the humans who built it. So that's it for its history and breakdown, but you definitely want to hear these cool facts and behind-the-scenes stuff. What makes this a great choice for the first Halo video is that it's much like the CR-90 from Star Wars, being the very first ship that we ever see in this universe. The name Halcyon comes from Greek, meaning idyllic or happier past, and it's where you get the phrase halcyon days. And so it's a cool reference to the fact that while humanity may have thought it was in tough times fighting all these insurrections, those were much happier days than when they had to face extinction from the Covenant. The ship was designed by Lorraine McLeese, influenced both by Halo's MA-5B assault rifle, which was actually designed by her husband Robert. And they say that out-of-universe inspiration comes from designs in Mobile Suit Gundam. This husband and wife duo would also lend their names to the in-universe designers Dr. Robert McLeese and the important shipyard Rays McLeese, Rays being Lorraine's middle name, which is a pretty neat way to tie yourself into the canon, creating a ship that 2 decades later is still one of the most iconic designs in Halo. If you want to check them out, here are some of the sources used to make this video. But most important of all, remember, if you can't outgun your opponent, you can always outlast them, and the AI will be with you, always. When you want a coalition of alien species to get along, force them to live in the same space station. What's up, Meta Nerds? Today's video is all about the fungal-shaped space station and capital of the Covenant Empire, High Charity. High Charity is a space station of immense size and power. Also known locally as the Holy City, this station serves as the government, military, and religious center of the Covenant, a tightly woven alliance of different alien species bent on wiping humanity from existence. From here, the 3 high prophets of regret, mercy, and truth ruled the Covenant Empire and supervised the destruction of humanity from upon their holy thrones. So let's break down a ton of its stats and then we'll get into its history and behind-the-scenes facts. The station is utterly massive, measuring 348 kilometers in diameter, a height of 505 kilometers, and weighed approximately 100 trillion metric tons. That's larger than both the first and second Death Star combined. To put this into a real-world perspective, the Gerald R-4 class supercarrier, one of the largest warships in the United States Navy, is 337 meters long. That means it would take more than 1,498 of these supercarriers standing end-to-end to match the height of High Charity. And to get a better idea of its diameter, you could lay 168,000 humans head to feet and still have some wiggle room. Or you could think of it as 1/10 the diameter of the moon, or about 418 times the UNSC Infinity. And just to help visualize this a little more, here's how it would compare to ships from other fandoms. There are no speed stats for this station, but it was completely mobile and capable of traversing the galaxy with its escort fleet using advanced slipspace drives. High Charity had reactors of its own called founts, but these are only used as backup power. This station receives the vast majority of its power from the engine of a dormant Forerunner dreadnought, which was left behind by the ancient, godlike Forerunners, who are so advanced that this entire station is operating on just a fraction of that energy output. Not much else is known about how these dreadnought engines work, but the Sanshum, which is the race of the prophets, were able to activate some of its systems in order to take advantage of this immense power. The total population of High Charity is unknown, but we do have some numbers for the capital city located at the very top of this station. It had a population of roughly 7.7 billion. It's almost as big as the current population of Earth, all contained in this one city. Some locations of interest and importance throughout the city are the High Council Chamber, the Sanctum of the Hierarchs, and the Mausoleum of the Arbiter. The entire Covenant religion centers around the ancient race of beings known as the Forerunners, who existed in the Milky Way galaxy for millions of years before they suddenly vanished more than 100,000 years before the events of the Halo games. They were extraordinarily advanced, and ruled the vast majority of the galaxy, while the empires of the ancient Sanshum and ancient humans were relegated to their own corners of space. The Forerunners left behind countless artifacts that the Covenant would pursue with determination, but the primary objects of their religion are the Halo installations.
When you first saw Halo, were you blinded by its majesty?
Blinded?
Paralyzed? Dumbstruck?
The leaders of the Covenant seek to use these Halo rings to propel themselves along the Great Journey, like the Forerunners that came before them, and achieve godhood. The prophets believe its cleansing flame will burn across the galaxy, destroying all who are unworthy, and allowing them, of course, to become gods alongside the ancient Forerunners.
Halo, its divine wind will rush through the stars, propelling all who are worthy along the path to salvation.
The Covenant have a hierarchical caste system, with different species often being relegated to different tasks. It's important to note that there are many other races making up the Covenant besides the one we just see in the games, with those lowest of caste member species essentially being slave labor aboard High Charity. Let's take a look at how some of the more well-known species lived in the Golden City. First up, the Sanshum. The prophets ruled the Covenant Empire for hundreds of years, dating back to the founding of the Covenant that began with a peace treaty between the Sanshum and the Sangheli. The Sanshum were the first to discover the Forerunner dreadnought that powers High Charity, which they determined was their holy birthright. They would actually use it against the ancient Sangheli who believed that the Forerunner technology should not be used. But as you might expect, this higher tech forced them into submission. The Sanshum would occupy the majority of the Covenant High Council, though they did share some power with the Sangheli. As the name fits, they gathered in the High Council Chamber, in the uppermost section of High Charity and where the Forerunner dreadnought was located, and we see these large pillars that surround the city. The Council Chambers was located in one of these pillars, while the Mausoleum was located in the neighboring pillar. Probably the most elite destination among the Sanshum was the Sanctum of the Hierarchs, which was located high above the Mausoleum of the Arbiter. A not too subtle architectural nod to the fact that the Sanshum's authority was above the Sangheli. This great chamber was decorated with enormous shards of glass, souvenirs from the countless worlds that they had set ablaze, the infamous Covenant tactic of glassing entire planets. The Golden City even had its own day-night cycle. This was made possible by an artificial star, with a day roughly equaling 265 Earth hours. The entire environment is actually very Earth-like, other than the fact that daytime seems to take about 10 days long, but the gravity and temperature are very much like what a human was used to, with ranges from 50 degrees to 75 degrees Fahrenheit. The entire Golden City floated above a vast field that was rich with methane. This is where the Covenant's population of Ungoi, aka the Grunts, lived. Because they breathed methane and those higher members of the Covenant did not, it was only right to house them separately. But that wasn't the only reason for keeping them apart. The Grunts are one of the lowest combat species on the Covenant totem pole, with possibly the saddest story of all.
Their world had no prayer against our might and majesty, and their peoples were quickly laid low, many of them brought into subjugation.
When the Covenant first came to their planet, they were little more than primitive beings. The Covenant was quick and ruthless, forcibly subjugating them into service and bringing them by the millions into High Charity. And that's where a rivalry with the Jackals formed. A hatred between these two races stirred, and the Jackals would eventually attempt to sterilize the entire Ungoi race. This atrocity was the final straw for the Grunts. They ferociously battled their oppressors across the Golden City, and it actually brought High Charity to its knees. Only for a short time, however. It all came to a swift end when an elite called the Arbiter used a plasma lance on one of his warships to glass the Ungoi homeworld. The superheated plasma caused the planet's methane to combust, wiping out most of the remaining Grunt population. A scene which was broadcast across High Charity for all the Grunts to see. If they wanted to keep fighting, eventually their entire race would go extinct. And so, just like that, the Grunt Rebellion was over. But interestingly, the Ungoi would be treated far better after this. Having proven their worth in combat as capable warriors, the Grunts would serve right alongside the elites and would be treated with more respect. Throughout the Empire, all of the species that made up the Covenant sought to visit High Charity at least once in their lives, but not everybody could afford to make the journey to see the Holy City. There's a ton more on the different races, but we'll cover that in a separate video. As for its history, High Charity began when the Sanshum reformists used the Forerunner dreadnought to escape from their homeworld, taking with them a large chunk of the planet's crust. This crust would become the foundation of High Charity, and the station's construction officially began in the human year of 850 BCE. For real-life comparison, the Roman Republic was still a few hundred years away from forming. The station would take over 200 years to finish, finally being completed around the year 648 BCE. That crust layering the upper half of the station actually has some significance to the Covenant, as it is made from the bits of surface of contributing species' homeworlds. It is also known as the skins of the First Worlds. This significant act serves as a reminder that the races of the Covenant are united in their quest to travel the sacred path of the Great Journey. High Charity would become the new homeworld of the Sanshum, after their original homeworld was left uninhabitable by a nearby supernova. The Forerunner dreadnought that powers High Charity almost became the station's greatest downfall. A piece of Forerunner superintelligent AI that lived aboard the dreadnought was called Mendicant Bias, and it tried to escape High Charity by disconnecting its ship from the Holy City. But the Prophets were able to stop Mendicant Bias's escape and shut him down. Cortana would later encounter this AI on High Charity when she attempts to slow down the Prophet of Truth escape, which was upon that very same dreadnought. Cortana recognized that this was not Covenant intelligence, but something else, far older and more sophisticated, as it kept outmaneuvering her attempts to slow down the launch of the dreadnought. As for the station's defenses, remember it wasn't only the center of government, but also the military. Because of the sheer importance of High Charity, it was constantly surrounded by a seemingly endless armada, made of Covenant warships ranging from Corvette class to the CCS battlecruiser and the mighty assault cruiser. This massive fleet, consisting easily of thousands of ships, remained in High Charity's orbit perpetually, making any kind of frontal attack virtually impossible. But in addition to that armada, the station itself was also packed full of weaponry. All those spikes you see protruding from the lower spine under the crust-covered dome are actually powerful plasma emitters, also known as plasma lances. Among these hundreds of plasma lances were 32 super heavy lances and 1900 lighter lances, which actually dwarfed the power of the largest Covenant ships. And because of the shape of this station, it had an effective firing range in almost every direction. These weapons fire a concentrated beam of superheated plasma that is capable of cutting through any hostile ship that dared to bring harm to High Charity. In fact, almost every class of ship in the Covenant fleet has at least one plasma lance, being more powerful than any of the other Covenant weaponry, strong enough to turn any surface into molten rock. As for some other locations of interest and importance, there are the Grand Estates, the Assembly Forges, and the Spires of Gifting. The Grand Estates were located on floating structures high above the fringes of the Golden City. This is where tens of millions of Covenant citizens lived according to their caste and station. Much deeper within the bowels of High Charity are the Assembly Forges, the largest and most efficient manufacturing industries within the Covenant Empire. Here the Covenant developed and created the weapons of war, from plasma rifles to battle cruisers and everything in between. High Charity didn't have any of the raw materials to make these war machines, so it had to rely on imports from across the Covenant Empire. These imports would arrive at the Spires of Gifting, a collection of hundreds of large docking prongs extending from the lower tail of the station. Each world within the Covenant was required to pay tribute to High Charity in the form of resources like food and raw materials, hence the name Spires of Gifting. By the times humans get involved in its history, it would be most famously known for its role in the Battle of Installation 05, one of just many Halo rings scattered across the galaxy. This thought-invincible space station would unfortunately meet its end here. When battling the humans on the Halo ring, the Covenant erupted into a bloody civil war. The diverse species of the Covenant were torn apart when they were forced to choose a side between the Loyalists and the Separatists, the latter feeling that they were betrayed by the High Prophets. The defense fleet surrounding High Charity destroyed itself as Loyalists and Separatists battled each other, trying to take control of this crucial station. A parasite called the Flood, originating from the Halo ring below, managed to sneak onto the station and began infecting all of the Covenant aliens on board, turning their most important asset into an enormous flood nest. The billions of Covenant aliens that could not escape were quickly infected and became a part of the Flood. The Separatists were unable to capture the Prophet of Truth, but did manage to drive off the Covenant Loyalists, and remained around High Charity in an attempt to control the spread of the Flood. Their efforts were partially successful, but one Flood-infected Covenant ship managed to slip through their blockade and escape. The Separatists would go on to join humanity, whom they had wronged for so many years. The Flood-infected city of High Charity would get away from the Separatists and later crash onto Installation 00, meaning its final end once and for all. The Flood upon it would be contained by an energy shield, or would be inadvertently released by Atriox, the brute leader of the Banished, another splinter faction that rebelled against the Covenant. But that installation would be High Charity's final resting place. So that's it for its history, but you definitely want to hear these cool facts and behind the scenes stuff. Its reappearance and story with Atriox comes from Halo Wars 2. As for its beginnings, it wasn't always meant to have this fungal, jelly-like appearance, with early concept art showing that it would have been a massive Covenant flagship, looking similar to other Covenant warships. Connor Breen, a xenolinguist expert working for the UNSC and ONI, stated that he was able to explore High Charity to a, quote, limited degree. We don't know exactly how or when this would have happened, because a lot of the details are fuzzy, but obviously it must have been before that flood infestation. And as it stands now, High Charity is the largest non-Forerunner structure in the Halo universe. But most important of all, remember, never underestimate the grunts, and the domain will be with you, always. What's up, Meta Nerds? For this breakdown, we'll be pulling from every source available to understand the Orion-class assault carrier, a formidable capital ship in the UNSC Navy. It is a product of human ingenuity and technological advancement, particularly during the tumultuous time periods of the Insurrection and Human Covenant War. Manufactured by the renowned Sino-Viet Heavy Machinery, a company that notably produced a range of civilian road vehicles, the Orion-class stands as a testament to Sino-Viet's versatility and engineering prowess. You might have seen Sino-Viet's ubiquitous trucks on human worlds, and they demonstrated a capability in space technology by constructing and disassembling spacecraft. Their facilities, spread across key human worlds including Earth, Reach, and Endesia, were instrumental in producing the bulk of the UNSC's naval fleet, ranging from carriers to frigates. The Orion class, with its imposing dimensions of 2,220 meters in length, 610 meters wide, and 660 meters tall, with a mass of 40 million tons, is a behemoth in space warfare. Its hull is a marvel of materials engineering, comprised of 0.9 to 1.75 meters of titanium A1 battleplate. This advanced armor is not just any titanium, but a high-grade titanium 50, molecularly strengthened with stacked nanotubes, and sandwiched with elastic polymer composites and intermetallic laminates. This composition ensures resilience against hypervelocity projectile impacts, as well as dispersing the energy in plasma-based weapons. The dull gray plates are more than just passive protection. They're integrated with thermal superconducting radiators to efficiently dissipate heat into space. Moreover, the area between these armor plates is filled with shock-hardening fluids and encapsulated healing agents, similar to the tech found in Spartan armor, which enables the hull to automatically seal minor breaches and reduce spall from impacts. Powering this colossal ship is a fusion reactor, at the heart of which lies the innovative fusion drive system. This system primarily employs an inertial electrostatic fusion reactor, or a series of such reactors with fused deuterium and helium-3 atoms. This fusion process generates a stable and abundant supply of superheated plasma, which is all contained within a magnetic field. The plasma is then directed into exhaust manifolds, combined with water or hydrogen reaction mass, and vectored out the engine nozzles to propel the ship. The drive system's design incorporates inertial electrostatic containment and higher-order manifolds to control fusion backblast. The inclusion of magnetic fields and thrust vectoring plates enhances the ship's maneuverability, a critical feature for a vessel of its size in the dynamic environments of space combat. In comparison with other ships of the UNSC fleet, the Orion-class assault carrier is not just a symbol of might, but also a floating fortress and command center. Its size and power plant capabilities far exceed those of smaller frigates or destroyers, enabling it to carry a substantial complement of spacecraft and marines. Its robust armor and advanced propulsion systems make it a formidable opponent both against human insurgents and the technologically advanced Covenant Armada. And so in many ways, its role in the UNSC fleet is both strategic and symbolic, serving as a deterrent to enemies while also showcasing the pinnacle of human spacefaring capabilities. Though I'm sure many insurgents saw it differently, being hunted by the state's high-tech Leviathan that they fed with their endless taxes. Its assault carrier capabilities are further augmented by its advanced slip-space drive, the Kawanishi Engineering SED-2494B SFTE Coden 3, a pinnacle of interstellar propulsion technology. This slipspace drive allows the Orion class to traverse vast distances at an immense slipspace velocity of 1.89 light-years per day. This speed is critical in their strategic deployment across the galaxy, ensuring rapid response and reinforcement capabilities in its various theaters of war. Navigation is managed through a state-of-the-art UNA uplinked navigation computer paired with the Explorer 15 navigation suite. This combination offers unparalleled accuracy and efficiency in plotting courses through both real space and slip space. The sophisticated navigation systems are essential for the precise maneuvers required by a ship of the Orion class's size, especially when operating near other fleets, both friendly and enemy, and coming out of space near complex gravitational fields or near celestial objects. features 2 distinct hangar bays, each designed for specific types of spacecraft. One hangar is dedicated to starfighters, ensuring quick deployment and recovery during combat operations, while the other is reserved for transport craft, facilitating the movement of troops and supplies. There are several different mission-dependent loadouts, but each very impressive and could include 12 to 24 GA TL-1 longswords, renowned for their versatility and firepower, ideal for close-up air support, 36 D-82 EST darters, which are smaller, agile fighters, 36 D-77TC Pelicans, the workhorse for troop and cargo transport, and 28 D-96 TCE Albatrosses, used for heavy lifting and large-scale troop deployment. This diverse array of spacecraft enables the Orion class to perform in a wide range of missions, from air superiority to ground support and logistics. And like I said, it's not just a warship, but also a mobile command center and troop carrier. Located towards the bow of the ventral side are the barracks, housing a formidable contingent of 3,000 UNSC Marines and 800 ODSTs, or orbital drop shock troopers. These troops are the backbone for ground operations, capable of rapidly being deployed to any planet, moon, or spaceport, and the ship's crew itself was a testament to the complexity of the requirements of such a large vessel, with 1,450 sailors responsible for the vessel's operation, as well as constant maintenance, and an overall 1,200 flight crew members dedicated to managing the extensive array of aircraft. And its armament is a testament to its role as a dominant force in space warfare. Central to its arsenal are 2 Series 3 heavy coil 19A3 R6 magnetic accelerator cannons, or MACs. These weapons are a pinnacle of human military technology, leveraging the principles of the coil gun to deliver devastating kinetic strikes. The operational mechanisms of a MAC is rooted in electromagnetism. It utilizes a series of coiled conducting wires, or solenoids, to accelerate a projectile. Each solenoid, when activated, generates a magnetic field that pulls the projectile forward. As the projectile passes through one coil, the next coil activates, continually accelerating the projectile down the length of the gun. The longer the MAC, the greater the muzzle velocity of the projectile, translating to more destructive power upon impact. And not needing all those specialized parts of an artillery shell, it's just drawing from the same energy that's used for everything else on the ship in a simple, solid projectile as ammunition. This mechanism differs fundamentally from that of a railgun, which also uses electromagnetic forces, but accelerates a projectile along 2 conducting rails. Despite that difference, railguns are sometimes colloquially referred to as MACs, as seen with the mini-MAC armament of the M510 Mammoth. But firing a MAC requires a significant amount of energy. UNSC ships, including the Orion, channel that power from their fusion reactors into capacitors to build up the necessary charge. This process, while essential for firing, does divert powers from other systems like engines, necessitating strategic decisions about when to charge and fire these weapons. But they can be fired at less than 100% charge, allowing for quicker firing rates at the expense of projectile velocity, and the option of having warning shots or not completely obliterating your target. And they're also versatile in their ammunition choices. They can fire a range of munitions, from dense ferric tungsten rounds to low-mass or depleted uranium slugs. The Orion class likely employs heavy rounds given its role as a capital ship, and these projectiles can vary in size and mass, from 10 meters long, 160-ton rounds, which are mostly used by the smaller frigates, to the colossal 3,000-ton projectiles fired by orbital defense platforms, which can reach velocities of up to 40% the speed of light. Additionally, MACs on ships like the UNSC Infinity can fire various sub-caliber munitions through their massive 27-meter bores, including special rounds like drone missiles or even cargo pods and small spacecraft. The versatility of MAC munitions allows for a wide range of tactical applications, from direct ship-to-ship combat to strategic bombardment, or even unconventional uses like deploying cargo or drones. And the assault carrier's armament is further enhanced by its extensive missile systems, featuring either 30 pods of M42 Archer missiles or 60 pods of M58 Archers. The 58 Archer is the most versatile and widely used missile in human naval combat.
Understood. Archer missiles inbound.
Favored not only for its cost-effectiveness, size, and agility, but also for its sophisticated targeting system and modular warhead design. This enables the M58 to engage a broad spectrum of targets, from capital ships to space fighters and even ground troops, all both in and out of atmosphere, and the myriad environmental factors you face across different planets. Each M58 Archer missile is significantly more compact than its predecessor, the M42, measuring 16.5 meters in length, with a wingspan of 2.32 meters and a fuselage diameter of 1.5 meters. Despite its small size, it packs a considerable punch with a maximum weight of 6,650 kilograms and a warhead payload of 1,650 kilograms. The missile's propulsion is provided by a trimino-hydrazine rocket booster, capable of accelerating it to velocities exceeding dozens of kilometers per second. Additionally, the Archer is equipped with course correction thrusters integrated into its fins, which also serve as stabilizers when in atmospheric flight. The construction of the M58 Archer features lightweight aluminum steel paired with a thin layer of ceramics, offering protection against high-speed debris, and likely even small arms fire. But of course it won't stop proper anti-air defenses. There it's just going to rely on its high velocity for evasion. The reinforced nose of the missile, composed of overlapping graphene sheets, is designed to retain its shape even when penetrating solid armor. A standout feature of the M58 is its networked AI system, which becomes more sophisticated with each missile launched. This is operating through an AN-DBK56 computing array and coordinates the flight information of nearby archers, optimizing both their power and survivability. And guidance to the target is achieved through integrated radar and LiDAR optics. And they also come with various types of warheads, each tailored for specific tactical roles. The M58A, high explosive, vacuum enhanced. This was the default warhead designed for space use and features an explosive substance enhanced by a reaction mass, improving both range and damage potential. And it's even more effective when detonated against a mass like armor. The M58B, electric warfare, disrupts electronics and computer networks through a high-energy electromagnetic pulse, affecting vehicles, guided munitions, and occasionally spacecraft. The M58C, ionic, specifically targeting energy shields, using hydrogen ions that turn it into plasma upon impact, weakening the energy bonds in these shield generators. The M58D, multiple independently targeted vehicle, or MITV, carries 7 high-speed missiles and is used for air defense, almost like a combo of a flechette round, and with the effect of flak, it's effective against space fighters and incoming projectiles. M58E Decoy lacks a conventional payload and houses a radiation emitter to draw enemy fire, emitting a high-energy infrared and radio signature to distract enemy defenses and clear the path for more powerful weapons. And then turning to the assault carrier itself, you'll see an array of point defense systems designed to protect the vessel from smaller, fast-moving threats like incoming missiles and strike craft. 14 twin M66 Sentry 279mm 36 caliber naval autocannons were significant components of the Orion-class's defensive armament. The M66's large caliber and twin barrel configuration provides substantial firepower, capable of engaging and neutralizing a variety of threats, including enemy fighters and incoming projectiles. Their size and power make them particularly effective against larger and more resilient targets that may get past the outer layers of a ship's defenses, which include the 20 quad M870 Rampart 50mm 50 cal point defense guns, which is widely adopted within the Rampart point defense gun family. Its popularity stems from its balance of size, power, and versatility. Compared to the later and more powerful models, the M870 is relatively smaller, but surpasses all the earlier versions in terms of firepower, which makes it suitable for everything from smaller corvettes and freighters to these massive supercarriers like the Orion class. Each M870 Rampart turret features a compact design with 2 linked batteries, each housing twin 50mm barrels. This setup allows a full 180-degree vertical traverse for each battery, providing comprehensive coverage against threats from all angles. The system's secondary sensor optics, combined with data from the mothership's main computer, enable effective engagement of targets even from obstructed angles. Its 50mm rounds, though smaller than those fired out of other point defense guns, are fired at extremely high velocities, granting them an effective range of up to 20 kilometers, and can be autonomously switched between various ammunition types, including flak, ultra-dense rounds, and magnetized rounds for countering plasma torpedoes. Each barrel can discharge up to 360 rounds per minute, amounting to a total firing rate of 1,440 RPM in this quad setup. While the system's firing sectors are unified under a single motor mechanism, its segmented design simplifies maintenance and repair, allowing for quick component replacement during combat. Then we have the 26 M810 Helix 35mm 99 caliber point defense guns. Described as spun up and hot, these rotary cannons are likely automated and operated by an artificial intelligence, similar to other UNSC point defense systems. The Helix's primary role is to intercept and destroy inbound threats, such as strike craft and missiles. Its 35 caliber and high rate of fire make it especially effective against swarms of smaller, fast-moving targets that could pose a significant risk to the carrier. Together, these defense systems form a layered and robust defense network around the Orion-class assault carrier. Its combination of heavy autocannons, versatile medium-caliber ramparts, and rapid-fire helix guns ensures that the carrier is well equipped to deal with a wide range of threats, from large enemy vessels and strike craft to fast-moving missiles and torpedoes. This comprehensive defensive armament is crucial for the Orion class, whether fighting humans or aliens. Looking to its history, after it was developed by the UNSC Navy, it became a pivotal asset during the Insurrection and Human Covenant War, serving primarily as a planetary assault vessel. Introduced in the early stages of the insurrection, the Orion class was designed to address the urgent need for extensive peacekeeping operations, which would become a hallmark of the conflict. These carriers, while not as heavily armed as their successors and equipped to handle only moderate attacks, were uniquely capable in planetary invasion scenarios due to their internal manufacturing facilities, similar to those found on some colony ships, and of course their vast complement of armored ground troopers. The deployment of the first Orion-class carriers occurred within the first 5 years of the Civil War. They were mass-produced to spearhead offensive operations against the fragmented and disorganized conflicts which characterized the early insurrectionists, often referred to as bushfire wars. The Orion class quickly proved its worth during this period and became a symbol of the UNSC's impending victory. However, the onset of the Human Covenant War dramatically changed the operational landscape for these carriers. Their relatively weaker defenses became a significant liability, leading to heavy losses, particularly in the first 5 years of that war. The loss of space superiority often spelled defeat in ground engagements, and with the Orion-class carriers deployed extensively across the outer colonies, they suffered disproportionately high casualty rates compared to other capital ships. The few that survived this brutal period were either withdrawn to the inner colonies to bolster defenses against prolonged sieges, or repurposed to lead expeditionary fleets targeting Covenant logistics. By the end of the Human Covenant War, only a few Orion-class carriers remained, largely those that had been reassigned to support manufacturing efforts. These surviving vessels were crucial in the recolonization of habitable planets and in the search for lost human colonies. Under the auspices of the newly formed UNSC Frontier Command, they played a key role in the post-war recovery and exploration efforts. And despite their significance, not a single Orion-class carrier would endure beyond the created crisis. Whether lost to sabotage, battle, or just decommissioning, the legacy of the Orion-class carriers is marked by their pivotal role in some of the most challenging periods of human space history. The story reflects the evolution of naval warfare and the shifting priorities of the UNSC, from peacekeeping efforts against less heavily armed humans, to being overpowered by alien forces in large-scale conflicts, to the post-war reconstruction and exploration period. That's it for its breakdown. And there isn't much for behind the scenes fact, except for a lot of these details come from Halo Fleet Battles and the Halo Encyclopedia. So be sure to check those out if you want to read up more on this and tons of other cool things. Please hit that like button, it's the best way to help me out. Subscribe if you want to see more, and check out these other videos, I'm sure you'll like them. But most important of all, remember, the small bushfire wars of the future will make the world wars of the past seem like a regional conflict. And may the domain guide you, always.
Thanks a lot for coming, and welcome to Halo on the Xbox.
What's up, Meta Nerds? This breakdown of the Banshee will cover how it works and the complete history going back to the ancient Sangheili uses, up to the Covenant and Banished. 14 versions in total, and we'll be using every resource available. Let's start with how and when they were produced, and it all starts in the engineering marvels of the Assembly Forges. Assembly Forges are the centralized manufacturing hubs of the Covenant. These advanced facilities, originally developed by the ancient interstellar Sangheili before the War of Beginnings, aka the First Age of Conflict, from 938 BCE to 852 BCE, where the Sanshayum and the Sangheili fought over conflicting religious views on the use of Forerunner tech. These early versions made by the Sangheili had issues that stemmed from imperfect attempts to reverse engineer the assembly vats of the Forerunners. These early versions made by the Sangheili had issues that stemmed from imperfect attempts to reverse engineer the assembler vats of the Forerunners. But eventually they mastered this, and for 3 millennia, the Covenant Empire relied on these forges, especially the largest and most sophisticated ones located on the capital city station High Charity, and these became crucial in maintaining the dominance of the Covenant Empire. Following the Great Schism in 2552 and the subsequent loss of High Charity to the Flood, these assembly forges have become highly valuable and fiercely contested resources among the Covenant splinter groups. They operate using advanced nanotechnology. The forges utilized clouds of programmable nanomachines that were supplied with raw materials and design templates, known as design patterns. The nanomachines then meticulously assemble items piece by piece from scratch. This process more resembles growing items than manufacturing them, with sub-assemblies formed from nanocomposite materials, and larger components integrated wholesale. As a result, Covenant tech often features an exterior shell of nanolaminate, characterized by curvilinear organic contours and an iridescent sheen. These sophisticated manufacturing methods allowed the Covenant Empire to prioritize custom-built and modified designs over rigid standardization and mass production, though such innovations were often resisted by the Sanshayum bureaucracy for dogmatic and political reasons. Outdated materials can be broken down and recycled as raw feedstock for the forges, enabling the seamless creation of new items, seen with older warships like the Malgan pattern armored cruiser, which can be dismantled and repurposed into more modern equipment. The creation and maintenance of design patterns are handled by artisan engineers, typically Sangheili or Sanshayum, whose work results from millennia of study and reverse engineering Forerunner artifacts by Covenant clergy artificers. Due to their ubiquity, assembly forges manufacture almost all materials in Covenant life, from small-scale weapons, vehicles, and shuttles to massive starships. Even energy swords, while most are manufactured in assembly forges, can have custom designs commissioned for construction by dedicated Sangheili blade masters. And the forges are categorized based on their size and are split into 3 known types: primary assembly forges, or the expansive manufacturing forges and refineries like the one we see in High Charity, and are considered the greatest and most capable within the Empire. This forge in High Charity was said to have been working for thousands of years, non-stop pumping out countless supplies for the Covenant. Secondary assembly forges manufacture light warships and attack ships, like the Xanar pattern light cruiser. Tertiary assembly forges are used for manufacturing space fighters, dropships, small arms, vehicles, and other equipment, and some could be built aboard vessels like the Majourn pattern agricultural support ship. Some larger Covenant carriers may have several of these small assembly forges, acting like an advanced 3D printer for just about everything you could think of. Raw materials go in, and everything from maintenance kits, food packs, and clothing all come out of these tertiary forges. Though because these were reverse-engineered versions of Forerunner tech, sometimes they're unstable and unpredictable. This is known to have happened with the Xanar pattern light cruiser, which resulted from an error that scaled down a Covenant battlecruiser design. And despite this being mutation, it did prove useful enough to enter service as a light warship. To fix this, it often necessitated resetting the entire forge, and with the sheer amount of Banshees produced over thousands of years, it's likely that this has happened countless times, though we don't have any specific images or stories of this happening. And so before getting into each of the different variants, there are some fairly standard features across all of them. The pilot enters from the side or the rear and would lay down prone in the cockpit, enclosed by a curved, reflective cowling without any visible windscreen, using displays to see the world around them. The craft features 2 wing canards, each ending in a boosted gravity propulsion drive with a jet and anti-gravity pod, which leaves behind its iconic vaporist exhaust trail, allowing it to exceed 100 km per hour or 62 miles per hour. It is relatively slow but highly effective, and able to perform complex maneuvers like aileron rolls, flips, and even has the ability to hover in place, although that is seldom used. It's equipped with 2 weapon pods beneath the fuselage, each housing a Class 2 plasma cannon, which was within the 100 to 250 kilowatt range, and a Class 2 fuel rod cannon. The plasma cannons are lethal to infantry, capable of instantly killing lightly armored targets, while armored targets like the M808 Scorpion can withstand only a few bolts before destruction, while of course a direct hit from a fuel rod cannon is almost invariably fatal even to the heaviest armored troops. Repeating plasma cannons with a higher rate of fire can be installed at the front of the anti-gravity pods, and we'll see the heavier Class 3 fuel rods used by the Anti-Air Wraith and Banshee, which have greater range and heat signature tracking capability, while the Seraph is also equipped with 4 fuel rod cannons and capable of locking onto air targets. But let's go back to the earliest version around 35 centuries before the Battle of Installation 04. Circa 1000 BCE, the Kizo Yaasabu pattern, which translates to Obsidian Wing, was a stealth infiltrator strike craft. This early, it already has an active camouflage system and sensor baffles to remain invisible to the naked eye and radar, and was primarily used by the Covenant Special Forces units for stealth operations. These were a crucial aspect to their inquisitorial operations, as they recovered relics from alien races and came to incorporate others into the Covenant. But this was based on the even earlier, perhaps by thousands of years, the Ustet Skelm, inspired by the predatory and voracious Skelm piloted by the Sky Chevalier orders. The Ustet Skelm was considered to be unreliable and slow, at least compared with its descendants. The original Sky Chevaliers flew upon the backs of their Skelm, with similar air of honor and chivalry attached to human knights and their horse mounts. And you can see the obvious similarity in looks between the Skelm and Banshee, though these animal mounts were later replaced after the advent of Sangheili industrialism with the first mechanical iteration in the form of the piston-driven warbirds. The signing of the Writ of Union at the close of the War Beginnings saw the Sangheili species incorporated into the newly formed Covenant Empire, beginning a decline in the Order's honor under the rigid structures of the Sanshayun, though they were never actively stamped out under the Covenant regime. The Empire's collapse in the 26th century has seen a revival of the Sky Chevaliers, as the ascetic and zealot orders have increased in power and wealth. And so the earliest equivalents of the Banshee were smooth, elegantly contoured combat flyers, these Utet Skellen, which were often dedicated to ceremonial roles, with the wing shape being made from animal skins or plant fibers, and you would lay down in them just like with human gliders, and just like how the ancient Chevaliers would have laid down on top of the Skellen. With that being turned into the combat machine of the Kizu Yasabu, they would further develop the Sitar pattern multi-role Overwatch survey craft, an amphibious variant that was used as security for Ocean Covenant installations and during deep-sea artifact retrieval missions on alien worlds. Jumping forward thousands of years to the 2500 CE and likely passing over countless iterations that were lost to time, as well as monstrous, malfunctioning Forge versions, we have the first Banshee to be met by humanity, the Ogal pattern attack flyer, or as the UNSC type classification has it, the Type 26A ground support craft. It was first encountered on the human colony World Harvest, and quickly got the nickname the Banshee as a reference to the female spirit in Celtic mythology. That gives a blood-curdling wail that, if heard by one, meant they were destined to die shortly after. The high-pitched sound made by these craft, especially when pulling off its tight maneuvers, created this unique sound that would strike fear into anyone who heard it. And we must always remember that as we most often see this universe through the eyes of Master Chief, to the average citizen and even hardened Marine, these Banshee were nearly indestructible, incredibly fast and agile, delivering a fuel rod that could kill you even behind cover, or disintegrate you and friends on the open field with surgical precision. The cruel call of the Banshee ringing out over the battlefield was a promise of inescapable death, just like the myths of old. At a length of 5.6 meters or 18 feet 4 inches, it was only 4 feet longer than the Ghost, and at a height of 3.3 meters or 10 feet 10 inches, it was a bit more than twice the Ghost's height, while being 6.8 meters or 22 feet 4 inches wide, about twice as wide as the Ghost, or about 4 feet shorter than the Scorpion. It weighed 2.5 metric tons, which is about twice the weight of a Honda Civic, but nothing close to the roughly 18 tons for a modern fighter jet. Now this would spawn a variant, the Drelak, dubbed the Heretic Banshee for being most well known for its use by the faction led by Sessa Rafumi, who would be executed by Arbiter Vadami. These models worked in a boosted propulsion device and aftermarket energy shielding system likely put in by these heretics, and some of them removed the cowlings to reveal the glowing blue lights and internal parts of these Forerunner-derived internal components. The Ispalox pattern attack flyer, or Type 26B, was its successor, and would stand to be one of the sleekest, in contrast to its Ogal pattern and Int pattern counterparts. The Type 26B boasts an enclosed canopy with a distinct shape, featuring a sweeping design that curves upward towards the rear, and its wings are split and lack the characteristic anti-gravity pod found on the A and C models. At the rear, the craft is equipped with 2 control valances that pivot to enable exceptionally sharp turns. The 26B was designed for planetary atmosphere operations, typically flying at altitudes of 300 meters or 980 feet, though usually lower to maximize its drive system's effectiveness and evade enemy air defenses, though it can reach altitudes of up to 2,500 meters or 8,200 feet, with minimal loss of performance, and some accounts say it's even capable of reaching orbit, albeit at a very slow pace. Despite lacking a life support system, it can function as a space fighter to some extent, though its space battle performance is considered merely adequate compared to specialized craft like the Elseda pattern, which we'll look at in a bit. Some post-war modifications have enhanced its capabilities as a scout in space environments, though independent life support systems, such as those in the Ranger harness, still remain necessary. It is only a foot taller than the original, but is 5 feet longer and 3 feet wider. The 26B would see limited use by the Covenant until the war with humanity, largely due to high attrition rates of older peacetime Banshees. It made its debut against the UNSC on December 3, 2525, during the final stages of the Battle of Alpha Corvi II. It was deployed alongside numerous Erdnecht pattern Banshees, most notably during Captain Whitaker's United Rebel Front Forces' last stand against the overwhelming Covenant ground forces. By 2550, the Ispalox pattern had become a staple in the Covenant's armed forces, and it was used extensively during the Fall of Reach and the Battle of Installation 04, and would go on to play a significant role in the Battle for Earth, particularly with the Fleet of Sacred Consecration during the Battle of Mombasa. After the Covenant War, newly commissioned Ispalox pattern Banshees were heavily employed by Jul 'Mdama's forces, especially during the Battle of Requiem. The Banshee variants used by the Banished during the conflicts on Installation 07 and 2560 under the War Chief Ascarum was likely based on the Ispalox pattern, and many, if not most, were heavily modified T-26B models. The variant that spawned from this one was the Teved pattern attack flyer, or the Type 26BZ. Just about everything is the same except for it has fewer layers of armor, giving us another great look under the plates to see some of the machinery and energy systems. The final variant of the Type 26 is the C, or Erdnecht. It's only a few inches shorter than the A, and it's believed that this is the weakest of the three. Something like a reserve version that we only see in large numbers later in the war because of their dwindling reserves because so many were being destroyed. Though there were some used before the Battle of Earth, in fact the earliest recorded use of the Erdnecht pattern was against the UNSC and insurrectionists during the Battle of Alpha Corvi II. And so these, along with several Ispalox patterns, and then later during the brief assault on Algolus, where many of them were summoned to weaken military forces defending weapons research facility T-12A, attempting to protect and destroy valuable data. One Banshee even shot down a civilian cargo transport fleeing the scene, using that trusty fuel rod cannon. Many of these were destroyed during the facility siege by a lone, hunting Yggdrasil Mark I ADS operated by Sergeant Ghost. The Fleet of Particular Justice also deployed several of them in the final stages of the Battle of Installation 04, combating both UNSC forces from the Pillar of Autumn and the Flood. The Erdnecht became the standard model used by the Prophet of Truth's forces during the Battle of Earth, particularly during the Battle of Kenya and Installation 00. The remnants of the Fleet of Sacred Consecration utilized these Banshees during the Battle of Mombasa shortly after the Prophet of Regret's departure at Installation 05. And the last we see them by the Covenant is by the Fleet of Retribution, employing them against Truth's forces. Post-war, it remained in use among many Brute-led remnant factions, but also by Sangheili factions, including Merg Vol's Covenant during the Battle of Dratheus V, Bata Gajat's mercenary group during the attack on Elan IV, and the UNSC-allied Sangheili detachments sanctioned by Arbiter Thelvadam. The largest divergence comes by the Type 27 Exo-Atmospheric Multi-Role Fighter, or the Elseta. It is far larger, about twice as long, though only 25% wider, and about the same height. Most of that length is in the tail portion and longer cannons up front that are two heavy plasma cannons, and it keeps a single fuel rod cannon in between. Its forward-swept canards and strategically placed impulse engines enhance maneuverability in zero-gravity environments. The craft also has extended tail stabilizers that help reduce turbulence during atmospheric transitions and docking. Unlike standard models, the Elseta pattern boasts an enclosed, vacuum-sealed cockpit with integrated antennas for communication, and so is purpose-made to excel in space combat, as well as any atmosphere no matter how inhospitable. Inside the cockpit, the pilot has access to a wide-angle view screen and a sophisticated instrument console, with holographic readout panels for monitoring various systems, including the impulse drive. Piloting the Banshee involves spherical control grips on either side of the view screen, and the pilot lays on a cushioned bed and is secured by a stability harness across their sides and hips. When its impulse drive is fully activated, the control panel glows amber, and in a landed position, the pilot can make the Banshee hover a meter off the ground by sliding their palms forward on the control grips. Pushing the grips forward propels the craft, while tapping the undersides fire the plasma cannons. Sliding hands to the back of the grips initiate a climb, raising the nose and lowering the tail stabilizers, though it is highly vulnerable to the electromagnetic pulses from human nuclear weapons, which can leave it incapacitated and stranded in space without any means of communication. A very practical feature is that it can be mounted on hangar walls, in the undersides of Covenant warships' hulls. These versatile craft excel against stationary weapon emplacements, EVA-equipped infantry, and in reconnaissance missions. Their true strength, however, lies in high-volume deployments. When launched in mass, Elseta pattern Banshees can overwhelm heavier fighters like the GA-TL-1 Longsword Interceptor, as well as escort ships such as cruisers and frigates. While the Seraph served as the Covenant's primary fighter for ship-to-ship combat, the Elseta pattern Banshee provided crucial screening and support roles, often tipping the scales in favor of Covenant forces during battles. It was first encountered by the UNSC before March 5, 2526, when Spartan IIs captured 5 fighters from the frigate Radiant Arrow. Before Dr. Catherine Halsey could properly inspect and document them, Blue Team utilized these fighters during a mission to destroy Covenant munition carriers above Adelon. During this battle, the fleet of Inexorable Obedience deployed additional Elseta patterns in order to defend their logistics fleet. Many of them played a role in the Covenant's attacks on the Epsilon Eridani fleet and orbital stations over Reach during the invasion, especially during Operation Uppercut. Squadrons of these Banshees, along with more powerful Morsum pattern Seraphs, were used to assault the UNSC refit station Anchor 9, and later to defend the corvette Ardent Prayer from the UNSC borders. At the start of the Battle of Installation 04, as the UNSC Pillar of Autumn was boarded by Covenant forces, coming from the Fleet of Particular Justice, Elseta pattern Banshees and Morsum pattern Seraphs were deployed to attack the cruiser. The ODSTs of Fireteam Raven managed to activate the ship's M910 Rampart point defense network, inflicting heavy casualties on the attacking Banshees and Seraphs. By 2558, many of them were used by Vada Gadget's mercenary group during the Battle of Elan 4. Now the Type 27 gets no variants, but is succeeded by the Type 54, or the Denomi pattern attack flyer, and it was made by the Sangheili post the Human Covenant War, and so this is the first Banshee made while free from the Covenant since those primitive gliders of old. It adds 4 feet in length to the original and is 6 feet wider, but only about 6 inches taller. Freed from the fabrication shackles of the Sanshayum bureaucrats, this pattern was fused with a multitude of improvements, including an integrated energy shield. The biomimetic aesthetic is considered to be the closest thing to the original mount, the Skelm. During Operation Bird in Hand in October 2558, Blue Team hijacked several of them to sabotage Argent Moon's reactor cooling system, which ensured the station's destruction. Realizing the Banshees were too slow to escape the imminent explosion, and with their Pelican likely destroyed, Blue Team abandoned their craft and made their escape aboard the Winter-class prowler Oni Acrisis. Now the final variant comes from the Banished forces. The Atuli Workshop attack flyer is a variant of the Banshee ground attack aircraft, and unlike the more common Kalum Workshop Banshees used on Installation 04, these are built on the frames of older Orgom pattern models. But it would be both shorter and more narrow than even the original, but is a little taller, likely to accommodate the larger brute frame. The Atuli Workshop, a Sangheili clan workshop, designed this variant on the Siphon pattern assault carrier Enduring Conviction. Shipmaster Let Volir approved its production, using the ship stock of Orgrim pattern Banshees as a base to create a modified version to support banished operations on Installation 00, while mainline production is handled by the Armory of Gathrog. These have all been up-armored from their Sangheili origins, drawing inspiration from an aerial predator native to the Jiralhani homeworld, Doisak. The enhancements focus on the cockpit and wings, with improved armor and tuned plasma cannons and fuel rod cannons for increased damage. The Atuli Workshop Banshee also offers various mission packages tailored to specific deployment needs. The most common has plasma torpedoes, an upgrade from the fuel rod that is enhanced for anti-aircraft operations, though there's also the purpose-made Unstable Banshee, a modification reflecting the brute's reckless nature, equipping the Banshee with volatile ordnance packs, so that if the Banshee is shot down, it can kamikaze into enemies, causing additional damage in the explosion. And these were heavily used during their campaign on the Ark against the forces of the UNSC Spirit of Fire in 2559. The Kalum Workshop attack flyer is a retrofitted Banshee and used during the conflict on Installation 07 and 2560. Unlike the Atuli variant, this one's based on the Ispolex pattern, or Type 26B, and is optimized to enhance armor and combat durability while maintaining the performance of the main chassis. They achieve this by adding thick metal plates across the cockpit, front, and wings, while boosting the aerodynamic efficiency of the original Ispolex. This sleeker profile and long tail design reduce drag, improving overall top speed and allowing the Banshee to function as an interceptor when needed. Though despite its increased length and width, it remains similar in height to the original model. And so that's it for the breakdown of all the different variants across all these thousands of years. As for behind the scenes facts, there surprisingly isn't much, but there's a ton of fascinating concept art that shows how this iconic craft came to life, which would come to be one of the most unique and memorable vehicles in all of video game history. And these renders are from as early as 1999, back when Halo was still envisioned as a third-person game.
It's really nice not to be showing you a movie today, and although it makes me very nervous to actually play this for you, I am going to be playing Halo in the flesh on the Xbox. On behalf of the whole Halo team, thanks a lot for coming, and welcome to Halo on the Xbox.
And you have all these different iterations from different games, with some playing with the idea of a more Scorpion look. If you want to learn more, a lot of this comes from the Halo Encyclopedia. Please hit that like button, it's the best way to help me out. Subscribe to see more, and check out our other videos, I'm sure you'll like them. But most important of all, remember, Banshees are a lot scarier when you're not a Spartan too. May the domain preserve you. Always. What's up, meta nerds? Today we're going to be doing a full breakdown and history of the Warthog, or its technical name, the M12 Force Application Vehicle. So we'll be diving into its specs, usage, and history as one of the most important UNSC vehicles, as well as ending on some behind-the-scenes facts. The Warthog is a family of all-terrain vehicles designed for a variety of functions. They all share the same core structure, as well as the excellent speed and mobility, but the differences in armor and weaponry means that there's a hog for every situation. It was originally introduced in 2319 by AMG Transport Dynamics, under the name Z12, before being fully introduced to the galaxy as the M12. This means that the design of the Warthog is over 200 years old by the beginning of the Human Covenant War. And while the Warthog has seen many different iterations and updates, that's still an impressive service life, especially considering that it still remains the most common ground vehicle in the UNSC. The Warthog is so prevalent, in fact, that every UNSC service member, regardless of branch or specialty, is required to be trained on how to operate and maintain it. Following the Human Covenant War, however, the Warthog finally saw some of its first canonically confirmed updates, slightly altering the frame and adding some new features, including a redesigned transmission, drive shaft, and swing axle system, along with a nano-prismatic paint job, which could be programmed to refract light in different colors, being an active camouflage to blend into any environment. This version would be dubbed the M12B and enter service in late 2552. Let's look at some of its stats. The standard Warthog has a length of 6 meters or 20 feet, a width of 3 meters or 9.8 feet, and a height of 3.2 meters or 10 feet. Though of course that height changes depending on the weapon system attached to the vehicle. This gives the Warthog an imposing presence on the battlefield, especially considering how mobile it is for such a large vehicle, having a top speed of 78 miles per hour or 125 kilometers per hour. It's a bulky vehicle from every angle, with its length making it more than twice the size of a UNSC Mongoose, and a grunt longer than a current Humvee, while its width made it about 5 Forerunner monitors across, and its height is a full 3 feet taller than Master Chief in his Mjolnir armor, or 2 grunts stacked on top of each other. It weighed 3.25 tons, making it about half a ton heavier than a Humvee, or about equal to 6 Spartan 2s. And while we never get a confirmed carrying capacity, it can carry at least 3 Spartans in full armor, 2 in the front plus the 1 on the mounted weapon, making its maximum carry weight at least 1.5 tons, which is the same payload as a Ford F-250. That speed and large size allowed the Warthog to break through human insurgencies, and even the battle-hardened Covenant. And when this thing was barreling down on you with those 2 tow cable hooks jutting out from under it, it was quite intimidating. And by the way, these 2 hooks look similar to the tusks of a Warthog, and that's where the vehicle gets its name. The most common variant of Warthog, the M12 Light Reconnaissance Vehicle, was equipped with either an M41 or M46 Vulcan Light Anti-Aircraft Gun. The M12B models coming with an M343A2 chain gun. This was the most fielded variant of the Warthog, but many more were produced, capitalizing on the platform's ability to be adapted for any function. The most basic version was the Scout Warthog, removing any mounted weapons in favor of a higher carrying capacity. Other notable variants include the M12R Light Anti-Aircraft Vehicle, equipped with M79 or M80 multiple rocket launchers, and is also known as the Rocket Hog or Missile Hog. The M12G1 Light Anti-Armor Vehicle, equipped with an M68 or M555 Gauss cannon, affectionately called the Gauss Hog. And the M831 Troop Transport, refitting the back of the vehicle to add seating for 4 additional passengers. Each of these models could also come with different camouflage, and other small tweaks including increased armor and environmental protection to suit different battlefields. including the Tundra, Arctic, Woodland, and Tropical variants. While these different versions all shared a very similar base design, there were several which took the modifications even further, like the M862 Arctic Warthog, which had a closed cabin and replaced its tires with 4 treads, which provided better traction in icy conditions. The Office of Naval Intelligence, or ONI, was also known to field their own Warthog, colored black with greatly improved armor and equipped with either an upgraded chain gun, Gauss gun, or rocket launcher. The UNSC Spirit of Fire and its crew would also field more unique versions, developed in their 20-year isolation from the rest of the galaxy, including a Trooper Warthog, an up-armored M12G1 Gosshog, which included dazzle camouflage, the Armored Warthog, a version of the M12 light reconnaissance vehicle with heavier plating, most notably around that turret, a Flame Warthog, which is a variant with a mounted flamethrower and incendiary grenades, and a version personally customized for Sergeant John Forge, often called the Forge Hog, with heavy armor, energy shielding, and a field of nanobots for self-repairing. Following the peace between humanity and the Sangheili-led portion of the Covenant, now under the banner of Thalvatum and the Swords of Sanghelios, would develop 2 of their own experimental versions of this Warthog. The Vespin Warthog, essentially a rocket Warthog with increased armor, and the Sword Warthog, an advanced variant with increased armor and a Covenant energy shield, along with an M343A2 chain gun, modified to fire the Sudanese crystal ammunition, turning it into a sort of giant Covenant Needler. And much like Humvee to Hummer, there are several civilian models produced, such as the simply named Hog, with luxury features like voice control and sound dampeners to nullify road and engine noise. The 550 Scuderia Starspeed M12R or Rally Hog had ceramic armor instead of the standard titanium, and included turbines for increased speed. In the M12S Civilian Sport Transport, which cut down both the size and weight by 25% and 30% respectively, gave it a notable speed boost from 78 miles per hour to 119 miles per hour. Each of these civilian versions of course lacked the weapons. However, the 550 Rally Hog would be incorporated into the UNSC Infinity's wargames, which were training simulations using it in the light reconnaissance configuration with a mounted chain gun. Despite these many different forms, the core of the Warthog would remain the same, with a 4-wheel drive powered by a 12-liter liquid-cooled hydrogen internal combustion engine. These engines use hydrogen as a fuel source after humanity developed the technology to move past traditional fossil fuels, and almost all ground vehicles incorporate hydrogen engines. The Warthog also featured a Grog-Hamptmann solar saline actuator to convert both fresh and salt water into hydrogen fuel. So when we see those fuel cans on the back of Warthogs, they're actually carrying water. With a 12-liter tank, it could travel up to 490 miles or 790 kilometers. But really amazing engineering is that it could passively collect condensation from the atmosphere, meaning that just by waiting overnight, you could collect on average 125 miles of fuel just from that condensation. All of these features meant that it was nearly impossible for a Warthog to run out of fuel. The Warthog was one of the most valuable assets to the UNSC, its speed nearly matching the Covenant's Ghost, but with the added benefit of durable titanium armor that could shrug off a significant amount of small arms fire, and with the right weapon mounted up top, even the more common chain gun models, it was able to decimate the Ghost within just a few seconds. But the Warthog did come with some significant disadvantages, the most obvious of which is its open top seating, meaning that it was easy for sufficiently skilled marksmen to take out the driver and/or gunner, so don't expect to race through any Jackal neighborhoods. The Warthog was also difficult to operate for inexperienced drivers, with all that weight and speed making it prone to tipping over, especially in poor weather conditions where the tires could lose traction. But despite all that, the Warthog was used to tremendous effect during the Human-Covenant War, being able to take out the lighter Covenant vehicles and infantry with ease, especially in its Gauss and rocket variants. It is also essential to the survival of Spartan John 117, on more than one occasion, being used to escape the detonation of the Pillar of Autumn on Installation 04, as well as the partial destruction of the Ark, allowing Master Chief, Cortana, and the Arbiter to reach the hangar of Forward Onto Dawn before the Battle of Installation 00. So that's it for its history and breakdown, but you definitely want to hear these cool facts and behind the scenes stuff. The Warthog is primarily inspired by the real-life Humvee used by the US military, with its all-terrain capability and the mount-turreted weapon system. The Humvee even has a treaded variant for deep snow, which likely influenced the M862 Arctic Warthog. The US Air Force also has another vehicle used for combat search and rescue, which is actually nicknamed the Warthog, though its functionality differs greatly from the one in Halo. The Warthog itself has seen several cameos in other games, such as Forza, which even included its own version of the iconic Warthog run, and Rocket League, which created its own variant, the Needle Hog, which featured Sudanese crystal afterburners. This design was actually semi-canonized as a rejected experimental variant under the name Project Hogsticker. In Halo 3, ODST, and Reach, the model of the Warthog has Puma written on the tires, a reference to the popular parody series Red vs. Blue. Also, there's a funny mistake on the official stats on Halo Waypoint, where the width is inaccurately stated as 20.5 feet, which is the same as its length. Another quirk with the vehicle is that in the games, you can actually begin driving the Warthog as soon as you start to board it, before even sitting down and touching the pedals. And there are actually several fan-made versions of this vehicle, 1-to-1 scale, that are actually roadworthy, which is definitely a goal of mine. And a lot of this information comes from the Halo Encyclopedia. But most important of all, remember, all you need to end a game right is 2 words, 10 letters, and the right music. And the Warthog fuel will be with you, always.
Infinity, the guy just closed off our entrance to the composer.
What's up, Meta Nerds? In this video we'll be breaking down the Poseidon class using every resource available. It was deployed by the UNSC Navy post the Human Covenant War, and represents an evolution in naval warfare technology and strategic deployment. Martian Metals, a company with a rich history dating back to 2520 with the launch of the Mulzac class transport, spearheaded the development of this Poseidon class. It was introduced in 2553, right after the war with the Covenant, less than a year after the official end of the war. It was a strategic move by Martian Metals to address the changing needs of the UNSC Navy in a new era of space warfare. Despite its classification as a light carrier, its size and mass are indicative of significant operational capabilities. Fusion drive, a staple in human spacecraft propulsion, serves as the primary sublight propulsion system for the Poseidon. It's powered by fusion reactors using deuterium reactions, not only providing the necessary thrust for maneuvering in space, but also generating the power needed for the ship's various systems. This fusion drive exemplifies the advancements in human technology, especially in terms of miniaturization and efficiency. This miniaturization of fusion tech is also seen in the UNSC's use of compact fusion reactors and other applications, like the Mjolnir armor, which had a micro-fusion plant capable of powering the suit for 15 years. By having this tech in your light carrier, you could rapidly recharge equipment like the D-77TC Pelican's energy cells, and the UNSC Army and Air Force utilized air-transportable fusion reactor generators, like the MEP-PU 2550DE generators, which worked as mobile power stations. Though these reactors required xenotime, a critical ore underlying the strategic importance of resource acquisition and maintaining technological superiority in the galaxy. In contrast, the Covenant employs pinch fusion reactors to power their starships and machinery. This different approach to fusion tech highlights a diverse engineering philosophies. Here, the plasma generated is compressed and heated by pinched magnetic fields, a concept known as a Binet pinch, named after Willard Harrison Binet. This phenomenon involves the compression of an electrically conducting filament, typically plasma, though it could also be in solid or liquid metal form, but always being compressed or pinched by that magnetic force. This was the first type of device used for experiments in controlled nuclear fusion power, and does occur naturally in various phenomena such as lightning bolts, planetary auroras, and solar flares. But back to the Poseidon, the flexibility of this ship's power systems allows for the redistribution of energy output as needed. Non-essential systems can be made inert or disconnected to funnel power to critical systems like armaments or propulsion. This capability is crucial in battle scenarios, where prioritizing weapon systems or maneuverability can be the difference between victory and defeat. Interestingly, the reactors used in the Poseidon class, while advanced by human standards, are considered relatively primitive compared to Covenant tech. They also carry a degree of risk due to their volatility. If the reactor's cooling systems fail, or if they are pushed beyond their maximum heat loads, they can fail explosively. In extreme cases, the reactor failures can unleash energy comparable to a small supernova, highlighting the need for stringent safety measures and maintenance protocols.
To initiate an overload of the ship's fusion engines. The explosion should damage enough systems below it to destroy the ring.
For perspective, each reactor on the Covenant's unyielding Hierophant was capable of generating 512 terawatts, demonstrating the immense power output these reactors are designed to handle. And turning to its armament, let's start with the Mark 2551 Onager turrets. It has 2 of them, a testament to the UNSC's continued innovation in armament tech. These are most famous for their use on the UNSC Infinity, a post-war prototype flagship. During the battle at the Forerunner Shield Ward Requiem in 2557, the effectiveness of these turrets was demonstrated, despite initial setbacks due to jamming by Jul Madama's Covenant forces. Once operational, the Onager turrets played a crucial role in repelling the Didac and his forces. ONI's Ivanov station near Installation 03 utilized automated Mark 2551s, and they would provide critical cover fire against the Didac, showing that they were used on both offense and defense. And then we have a pair of M42 Archer missile pods. Archers are known for their versatility, adaptability, and long-range capabilities, making them a staple in the UNSC arsenal throughout various conflicts, including the Insurrection, the Human Covenant War, and the post-war period. While individual Archer missiles have limitations in terms of destructive power and a vulnerability to point defense systems, their strength lies in numbers. A barrage of Archer missiles can overwhelm enemy defenses, especially against unshielded targets. Originally employed in the mid-25th century, the M42 has a long history of usage across various classes of UNSC vessels. From the CMA Navy's Punic-class supercarriers and Mako-class corvettes, to the UNSC's S-14 base large strike fighters, the M42 has been a reliable choice for a wide range of ships. And it actually increased in usage after the Human Covenant War, becoming a key component in the arsenals of the rebuilding UNSC Navy, including the Trident-class heavy frigate and the Poseidon. The Infinity class was considered the spiritual successor to the Punic, and it had 350 of these Archer pods, with each pod itself containing 24 missiles. Then we have the 20 M870 Rampart point defense guns. These guns are an essential component of the carrier's defensive capabilities, designed to counter the high-speed threat characteristics of space warfare. These are 50mm coil guns, a type of electromagnetic gun that uses magnetic coils to accelerate objects. Since you're in space with no resistance from atmosphere, with the incredibly high velocities involved in space combat, human operators cannot effectively target incoming missiles and space fighters. Therefore, the M870s are typically fully automated, controlled by the ship's artificial intelligence. However, they can be switched to manual operation if necessary. Each Rampart turret consists of either twin or quad-mounted 50mm rapid-fire coil guns, along with a targeting scanner. Variations in the model include some fitted with an armored housing to protect the gun's mechanisms, while others don't have any protection. These can engage incoming threats like strike craft and plasma torpedoes, and they actively switch between different ammunition types, such as sub-caliber armor-piercing sabos and proximity detonation fragmentation shells. Though the M870s are most commonly mounted on lighter vessels, including corvettes and frigates, they've also been used on destroyers and carriers, though not usually found on cruisers and supercarriers. It has a really long service history, with the earliest deployment on the Mako-class corvette in 2388. It was succeeded by the M910 model, beginning service with the Valiant-class super heavy cruiser in 2493. But perhaps due to financial or other practical restraints, the older M870 remained a common fixture throughout the Human Covenant War and early into the mid-26th century. And so even in the post-war era and on a light carrier, they survive on protecting the Poseidon. And it really shows the UNSC's commitment to maintaining a balance of offensive and defensive capabilities in their fleet. Because it has variable ammunition and automated targeting, with enough of them together, you should be able to have a cloud of protection from even large swarms of enemy fire or attack craft. The Poseidon does have a very new look. That sleek and elongated cylindrical design represents significant advancements in UNSC naval architecture, being divided into two main sections, both predominantly covered with white plating. The aesthetic choice gives the Poseidon class a distinctive appearance, with the white plating primarily adorning the vessel's dorsal surface. The underside of the ship and a spar connecting the two main sections are notably devoid of this plating and feature a series of rectangular blue lights. At 719 meters in length, or nearly half a mile, it was smaller compared to other carrier classes such as the Orion, Epoch, and Punic. However, what it lacks in size and armament compensates with other strategic advantages. In the aftermath of the war, with shipyards over Mars and Jupiter heavily ravaged, the design of the Poseidon class was optimized for ease of manufacture. This adaptability in production was crucial for quickly replenishing the depleted UNSC fleet, which was a significant benefit in the immediate post-war period, with so many human lives lost, and perhaps a reluctance to join. The smaller crew requirement allowed them to be rapidly pressed into service, and were seen as vital in the recovery efforts starting in 2553. The two specific craft that stand out the most are the UNSC Milwaukee and the lead ship, UNSC Poseidon. Milwaukee was noteworthy for its advanced, reverse-engineered slip space drive, which drastically reduced time travel to mere hours, a remarkable feat in human spacefaring tech. It was uniquely configured without cryo chambers, instead featuring stadium-style seating in a large passenger cabin with a polarizing roof that could turn opaque or transparent. By September 2558, it had been repurposed as a passenger ferry to and from Onyx. As the lead ship of its class, the UNSC Poseidon is a symbol of the class's capabilities, but sadly a lot of details on its exploits and specific configuration still remain highly classified. Additionally, several unnamed Poseidon-class carriers are part of Battle Group Dakota, which alongside Vindication-class light battleships and Trident-class heavy frigates, engaged the Forerunner vessel Mantle's approach during the Didact's attack on Earth on July 25, 2557. This shows that even in major combat operations, they were still formidable against Forerunner tech. In summary, the Poseidon-class light carrier represents a critical component of the UNSC's naval capabilities in the post-Human Covenant War era, balancing ease of production and operational efficiency while still playing effective combat and support roles. And they were crucial in rebuilding and strengthening the UNSC fleet, in a galaxy that never went long without war. As for behind the scenes facts, in the Halo 4 level Midnight, several Poseidon-class light carriers are depicted in the background, along with Vindication-class light battleships and Strident-class heavy frigates. These vessels are meant to be viewed from a distance and are not part of the main gameplay area. However, due to a glitch, players can approach and inspect the ships more closely. In the game, these ships are designed as visual elements, brushes, rather than solid objects within the level structure, so you can pass through them without collision when piloting the broadsword. And these in-game models are not representative of their actual sizes as defined by the lore. What's really sad is that the Poseidon and Vindication class battleship were initially planned to be featured in Halo 4 The Essential Visual Guide, but were omitted due to space limitations. They make their first appearance in Halo 4, and are also mentioned in the novel Halo Legacy of Onyx. Please hit that like button, it's the best way to help me out. Subscribe to see more and check out these videos, I'm sure you'll like them. But most important of all, remember, there's no such thing as the post-war era, and the domain will guide you, always.